You've been lied to about detachment. They told you it means not caring, not feeling, turning cold to the world. They told you detachment is weakness, an escape, a way of giving up. But if that were true, why do the ones who cling the hardest still suffer the most? Why do we hold so tightly to people, plans and outcomes, only to end up anxious, disappointed, and afraid? The truth is, detachment isn't about losing, it's about gaining. It's not emptiness, it's freedom. It's the power to love without chains, to give without fear, to live without being controlled by what you cannot control. Buddhism has carried this wisdom for centuries, that detachment is not indifference, but strength, clarity, and courage. When you release your grip, life flows. When you stop forcing, what's meant for you naturally comes. Tonight, as you hear these words, something inside you will soften. The weight of expectations will begin to dissolve. The endless what-ifs will start to fade, and you'll feel a freedom you may not have felt in years. And when tomorrow comes, you'll see it clearly. If it's meant for you, it will come not by clinging, but by letting go. This isn't just another idea. It's a shift in how you live, a doorway to power, to clarity, to peace. The question is, are you ready to step through? Let's begin. And now that you've opened the doorway into this truth, let us step into the first lesson, one that is often misunderstood, twisted, and misused. Detachment has been given a false face in our modern world, confused with coldness, with apathy, with the shutting down of the heart. Many people hear the word and think it means building walls, caring less, feeling nothing. But this is not detachment, it is indifference. And there is a world of difference between the two. Think of it like this: indifference is a closing, detachment is an opening. Indifference hardens the heart, detachment softens it. Indifference numbs, detachment awakens. When you are indifferent, you turn your back on the world. When you are detached, you step into it more fully, but without chains. And this difference is not small. It shapes the way you love, the way you suffer, the way you walk through life itself. To understand detachment, we first need to look at what it is not. Indifference is an armor, often worn by people who have been hurt. It feels safer to say, "I don't care," than to admit how deeply we do. Indifference shuts down the flow of life, convincing you that feeling nothing is the solution. But here is the tragedy. When you block out pain, you also block out joy. When you close yourself to loss, you close yourself to love. Indifference is not strength. It is fear wearing the mask of strength. Detachment, however, is something entirely different. It is not the shutting down of emotion, but the freeing of it. It allows you to love without being consumed, to act without being enslaved by results, to face the ever-changing world without breaking every time it shifts. Detachment is spaciousness. It's the ability to hold something with open hands instead of clenched fists. And because of that openness, compassion flows more easily. You might ask, how can letting go make me more compassionate? Isn't love about holding on? But true love is never about possession. Think of the sun. It gives warmth, light, and life, but it does not cling. It shines because that is its nature, not because it wants something in return. That is what detachment makes possible. When you are not tied to controlling how others respond to you, when your worth is not chained to how your love is received, you can give more freely. You can love for the sake of loving, not for the sake of being needed. Indifference looks at someone's suffering and says, "It's not my problem." Detachment looks at the same suffering and says, "I will help where I can, but I will not drown with them." Do you see the difference? One is absence, the other is presence with clarity. Indifference withdraws because it does not want to feel. Detachment stays, but stays without being consumed by attachment to outcomes. And in this staying, compassion thrives. Buddhism teaches that suffering often comes from clinging, the desperate attempt to hold on to what will eventually change. We cling to relationships, to success, to identities, to possessions, and in that clinging we suffer when they shift, fade, or disappear. Detachment is the antidote. It does not tell you to abandon people or to walk away from life, but rather to loosen the grip, to care deeply, but without the illusion that you can freeze life in place. That loosening is what gives rise to compassion, because when you are no longer enslaved by fear of loss, you can meet others more fully in their pain. Think of a parent who tries to control every step of their child's life, holding tightly to protect them from harm. That grip often suffocates, turning love into control. Now think of a parent who guides, supports, and loves, but allows the child to walk their own path, make their own mistakes, and grow. Which parent shows more compassion? The detached one, because their love is not about ownership, but about freedom. This is how detachment differs from indifference. Indifference would not care at all, but detachment cares deeply without trying to possess. And here lies another truth. Indifference deadens your humanity. Detachment awakens it. When you are indifferent, you lose the richness of being alive, the highs, the lows, the intensity of experience. But when you are detached, you allow yourself to feel everything while being held by an inner strength that does not collapse under the weight of change. Detachment is not an escape from life. It is the capacity to meet life fully, knowing it cannot be controlled. Many people confuse emotional numbness with enlightenment. They believe that to be spiritual is to never feel pain, never grieve, never be moved. But Buddhism does not ask us to kill our emotions. It asks us to see them clearly. Indifference blinds us. Detachment sharpens our vision. A detached person can cry, can ache, can laugh, can rejoice, but they do not cling to these states as permanent. They flow with them as one flows with the river, knowing that water cannot be grasped in a closed fist. And let us go deeper still. Why does indifference feel so tempting? Because it promises safety. When you convince yourself that you do not care, you protect yourself from disappointment. But in protecting yourself from disappointment, you also lock yourself away from connection. You may avoid heartbreak, but you also avoid intimacy. You may avoid failure, but you also avoid growth. The price of indifference is life itself. Detachment, on the other hand, does not promise safety, it promises freedom. Freedom to love without fear, to act without the chains of expectation, to walk through impermanence with grace. And in this freedom, you are not numb, you are more alive than ever. Compassion arises from this freedom because you can meet someone's pain without trying to control it, without needing to fix it for your own comfort. Have you noticed how often people try to solve others' problems not out of love, but out of discomfort with suffering? Indifference ignores suffering, control tries to erase it, but detachment allows you to sit with it, to witness it, to help where you can, without needing it to vanish for your own peace of mind. This is why detachment and compassion are inseparable. Buddhism calls this quality karuna, compassion that arises from wisdom. And the wisdom is this: all things change. When you understand this truth, you no longer cling to fixing the unfixable. You love, you help, you serve, but you release the need for the world to bend to your will. This is detachment in its purest form, not coldness, not escape, but a union of clarity and kindness. Indifference creates distance. Detachment creates closeness without chains. When you are indifferent, people feel unseen. When you are detached, people feel free. And in that freedom, love flourishes. Because what is love, if not the ability to want the best for another without needing to own them? Think of a friend who listens without judgment, who supports you without needing you to change, just to make them comfortable. That friend is detached, not indifferent. Their care is unconditional, not based on their own attachment to outcomes. Compare that to someone who withdraws because they don't want to get involved. That is indifference, and it leaves you feeling abandoned. Life offers us endless chances to practice this difference. In work, detachment allows us to give our best without being crushed by failure or swollen by success. In love, detachment allows us to cherish someone fully without fearing their loss as the end of our world. In personal growth, detachment allows us to strive without despair when progress is slow. Indifference, however, poisons all these areas, making us withdraw, give up, or disconnect. So the question becomes, how do we practice true detachment rather than slip into indifference? The answer lies in awareness. The moment you find yourself saying, "I don't care," ask if that is truth or armor. Ask if you are closing because you are afraid to feel. Detachment does not fear feeling, it allows feeling without ownership. Awareness reveals the motive behind your stance, and in that revelation, you can choose differently. It also lies in remembering impermanence. When you accept that everything shifts, you stop grasping to hold it still. Indifference says, "I will not feel, so I will not suffer." Detachment says, "I will feel fully, knowing that both joy and pain will pass." That acceptance is the ground of compassion, because only when you accept impermanence can you meet others where they are, without trying to drag them into your illusion of control. And so, detachment is not a wall but a doorway. It opens you to deeper love, deeper clarity, deeper connection. It allows you to live without being broken by every change, and yet it keeps your heart open to every experience. Indifference builds walls to protect itself from life. Detachment opens its arms and says, "I cannot control you, but I can walk with you." This subtle difference changes everything. It is the difference between a life half-lived and a life fully embraced, between fear disguised as strength and strength born of wisdom, between emptiness of heart and fullness of spirit. And once you see this difference, you can never confuse them again. And once you see the difference between detachment and indifference, a new question rises to the surface, one that quietly shapes the way we live. If we are not meant to cling, then what becomes of our actions? Do our choices still matter if we let go of the results? This is where the wisdom of karma and detachment comes alive, teaching us that what we do carries weight, yet the freedom lies in not owning the outcome. There is often a misunderstanding about karma, as if it was some kind of cosmic punishment or reward system, handing out prizes for good behavior and punishments for mistakes. But karma is not a judge in the sky. It is the simple law of cause and effect, the ripple created by every thought, word, and action. Just as dropping a stone into water creates waves, every choice we make carries consequences. This is not a threat, it is a description of reality. And here is where detachment enters, to act with clarity, to give your best effort, to plant seeds with care, but to release the need to control when or how they grow. The problem begins when we mix karma with attachment. We want our efforts to bear fruit according to our timeline, our preferences, our vision of how life should unfold. We tell ourselves, if I work this hard, I must succeed. If I love this much, I must be loved back. If I do good deeds, life must reward me with ease. And when the outcome does not match the story we built, suffering rushes in. Detachment breaks this chain. It says, do the work, but let go of the ownership of the result. Allow the seeds to sprout in their own time, in their own way, even if you are not there to see them bloom. In Buddhism, this is called right action. You act because it is aligned with wisdom and compassion, not because you are trying to bargain with the universe. The intention behind the action is pure, and the detachment from the outcome keeps the heart free. This is why karma and detachment are not opposites, but companions. Karma ensures that every action has a ripple. Detachment ensures that you are not shackled to those ripples. Together, they allow you to move through life with integrity, without drowning in the tides of expectation. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly measure everything by results. A student studies and ties their entire sense of worth to a grade. An employee works hard and ties their entire sense of dignity to a promotion. A parent raises a child and ties their entire sense of identity to how that child behaves as an adult. The effort itself becomes poisoned by fear, pressure, and obsession. But when detachment is present, the same student studies because learning itself is worthwhile. The worker does their best because excellence is meaningful. The parent loves because love is their nature. This shift removes the burden of ownership and restores the joy of action. There is a story told of a farmer who planted seeds every year with patience. Some years, rain came on time, and the harvest was abundant. Other years, drought came, and the fields were barren. Yet the farmer did not stop planting, nor did he rage at the sky when conditions turned harsh. He did what was in his power and accepted what was beyond it. This is karma with detachment. You plant, you tend, you give your effort fully, but you do not tie your peace to the weather. This principle changes how we view success and failure. From the lens of attachment, success inflates the ego and failure crushes it. From the lens of detachment, both success and failure are simply results feedback from life that guides us to adjust our actions, nothing more, nothing less. The ego wants to own the victory and deny the defeat. Detachment sees both as passing clouds, not permanent identities. In this way, karma becomes a teacher, not a prison. When you release ownership of outcomes, something profound happens. The fear of failure weakens. So much of human hesitation comes from clinging to results. We do not take risks because we cannot bear the thought of things going wrong. But when you act for the sake of the action itself, without attachment to what follows, fear loses its grip. The artist paints not for applause, but because painting is their truth. The speaker shares not for approval, but because truth must be spoken. The kindness is given not for recognition, but because compassion flows naturally. Detachment from results opens the door to courage, and it also opens the door to peace. How many nights are lost to tossing and turning, rehearsing outcomes, worrying about what will happen? This endless loop is attachment, trying to control the uncontrollable. Detachment brings stillness. It says, I have acted with care, and now I release. The rest is not in my hands. Peace is born not from certainty, but from the willingness to trust the process of karma while letting go of ownership. It is also worth noting that detachment from outcomes does not mean passivity. Many people hear these teachings and think it means doing nothing, leaving life entirely to fate. But that is not the message. The teaching is, act with full presence, with integrity, with compassion, but let go of clinging to what the outcome must look like. Detachment is not about inaction, it is about pure action. In fact, when you stop obsessing about results, your actions become sharper, more effective, because your energy is not drained by fear. This balance can be seen in the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is about being fully engaged in the present moment. Whether you are cooking, working, or listening to a friend, the act itself is complete. It does not need to be measured by the outcome. A mindful cook prepares food with love and attention, regardless of whether others praise the dish. A mindful worker gives their best to the task, regardless of whether credit is received. Karma will carry the ripples of these actions, but detachment keeps the heart from being enslaved by them. The Buddha once taught that clinging to the fruits of action is like holding a torch against the wind. You may succeed for a while, but eventually you will burn yourself. Detachment is like placing the torch inside a lantern. It still shines, it still lights the path, but it does not scorch the one who carries it. Actions done without clinging are safer, purer, and ultimately more powerful. In relationships, this principle is life-changing. How often do we act with strings attached? We give affection, expecting it to be returned. We do favors, expecting gratitude. We listen, expecting to be heard in return. When those expectations are unmet, resentment grows. This is the shadow of attachment. Detachment allows us to love and serve without keeping score. Karma ensures that love and kindness ripple into the world in some form, but detachment frees us from demanding how or when those ripples return to us. In this way, our relationships become cleaner, lighter, and freer of hidden contracts. Detachment also transforms how we view justice. Many times, people act kindly and feel bitterness when their kindness is not recognized, or when others act unfairly and appear to prosper. Karma reminds us that no action disappears. Every cause has an effect, even if unseen. Detachment reminds us not to obsess over whether the scales balance before our eyes. Together, they teach us patience. You do what is right, not for the guarantee of reward, but because it is right. And you trust that life carries its own balance in time. This way of living also prevents burnout. Attachment to results is one of the main causes of exhaustion. Activists burn out when their efforts for change do not produce immediate transformation. Workers burn out when years of effort do not yield the recognition they hoped for. Parents burn out when their sacrifices are not met with gratitude. Detachment from outcomes allows effort to be sustained because the effort itself becomes the reward. You act from alignment with values, not from the hunger for results. And this alignment has its own energy, a renewable source that does not run dry. The harmony of karma and detachment is also deeply practical in daily life. Consider someone planting a garden. They choose the soil carefully, water regularly, tend the plants with patience. That is karma, cause and effect in action. But they also know that rain, sun, and seasons play their part. To demand that the flower bloom today, on their terms, would only bring frustration. To do the work and trust nature is detachment. And when the flower finally blooms, they rejoice without saying, "It bloomed only because of me." They honor both their effort and the forces beyond their control. This practice brings humility. When you are attached to outcomes, you take ownership of everything. I alone caused this success. I alone am responsible for this failure. But the truth is more complex. Countless factors play into every result. Detachment helps you recognize your role without inflating it. You did your part, and life did its part. This humility keeps pride in check when success comes, and softens self-blame when failure arrives. And with humility comes compassion for others. When you are attached to results, it is easy to judge others harshly, assuming that their failure is due to laziness or that their success means they are more deserving. But when you understand the balance of karma and detachment, you see that outcomes are the product of many forces. This perspective softens judgment and opens space for kindness. Detachment also frees you from the endless cycle of comparison. When you measure your worth by results, you constantly compare yourself with others who has more money, more recognition, more achievements. But when your focus shifts to pure action, the comparison loses its weight. You are not acting to prove your worth. You are acting because the action itself is aligned with truth. This dissolves envy and insecurity, replacing them with contentment. Another gift of this practice is resilience. Detachment does not prevent difficulties, but it changes your relationship to them. You can face setbacks without collapsing, because your peace is not chained to outcomes. You can continue acting, continue planting seeds, even when the harvest is delayed. This resilience is not cold endurance, it is a steady strength, born from the trust that actions matter, even when results are beyond your control. And there is one more layer to this teaching. Freedom from ownership also means freedom from guilt. Many people carry heavy burdens of regret, replaying the past, obsessing over results they could not control. Detachment allows you to see that you acted with the knowledge and capacity you had at the time, that outcomes are not fully yours to own. This perspective does not excuse harmful actions, but it releases unnecessary suffering from clinging to what cannot be undone. It allows learning, growth, and release. To live with karma and detachment is to live with both responsibility and freedom. Responsibility, because you know that your actions ripple. Freedom, because you release ownership of how those ripples return. This is the middle path, neither passive resignation nor obsessive control. It is a life of engagement without bondage, action without chains, love without fear. And when this way of living settles into the heart, the constant noise of what if and what next begins to quiet. The mind no longer demands guarantees. The heart no longer bargains with life. You still act, you still love, you still strive, but you are free from the weight of needing to hold the entire universe in your hands. This freedom is not escape, it is strength, clarity, and peace. And it is the foundation upon which the rest of detachment is built. And once we see that our actions are not ours to own, that karma unfolds in its own rhythm, the next veil begins to lift. If detachment means acting without clinging to results, then why do we still find ourselves restless, tapping our feet, asking when? When will my efforts bear fruit? When will love come? When will success finally arrive? This obsession with timing becomes its own chain, a silent form of attachment that robs us of peace even when we are doing everything right. The mind does not only cling to outcomes, it clings to clocks. There is a hidden anxiety buried in the question of when. It whispers that life is not moving fast enough, that we are falling behind, that something is missing until the future delivers what we crave. And yet the future never arrives in the way we demand. We create timelines in our heads and then measure our worth against them. At this age, I should be married. At this stage, I should be wealthy. By now, I should be healed, successful, enlightened. Each timeline becomes a ruler, and the more we measure ourselves against it, the smaller we feel. This pressure is not born from truth, it is born from attachment to when. Buddhism points to this as another face of craving. Desire often hides behind urgency, convincing us that peace will only come once certain conditions are met. But detachment from timelines dissolves this illusion. Life has never followed our calendars. It has always moved with its own seasons. Seeds sprout when conditions are right, not when we shout at the soil. A wound closes when the body is ready, not when the mind demands. To cling to when is to fight the natural unfolding of things. And this fight is what exhausts us. The mind believes that by obsessing over timing, it can control it. But time is not a servant. No amount of pacing, worrying, or planning can force the river to flow faster. And the paradox is that the more we cling to the question of when, the further peace slips away. When we let go of timelines, we step into trust. Not blind trust, but the recognition that life ripens in its own rhythm. This trust is not laziness, it is clarity. It allows us to act, to plant, to prepare, but without the poison of impatience. This attachment to timing also feeds comparison. We look at the lives of others and feel that we are late, that somehow they are ahead while we lag behind. But life is not a race, and each path has its own timing. Detachment teaches us that another person's season of harvest does not mean our soil is barren. It only means our season has not yet come. To force a bloom before its time only damages the plant. In the same way, to force ourselves into a timeline that does not belong to us only creates pain. When we release the grip on when, something surprising happens. We begin to notice the present. All the waiting, all the rushing, blinds us to what is already here. The obsession with the future steals the richness of now. Detachment from timelines returns us to the only place we can actually live the present moment. And in this moment, we often discover that the peace we were waiting for is already available, if only we stop demanding that life move faster. There is also a subtle arrogance hidden in timeline attachment. We assume that we know the perfect schedule for our lives, that we can map out the exact order of events that will make us whole. But how many times have delays and detours turned out to be blessings? How often has what we thought was too late turned out to be exactly right? Detachment humbles us. It reminds us that life's timing often carries a wisdom greater than our own. To release when is to bow to this wisdom, to stop demanding and start listening. This is not to say that waiting is easy. The human heart feels the ache of longing, the sting of delay. Detachment does not deny these feelings. It allows them without letting them become chains. It says, "Yes, I feel the hunger for what is not yet here, but I will not let this hunger poison the meal that is already on my table. I will walk forward, I will keep planting, but I will not be enslaved by impatience." This balance keeps hope alive without turning it into despair. The pressure of timelines also shows up in healing. We tell ourselves that by a certain time we should be over our grief, over our heartbreak, over our mistakes. But the heart has its own clock. To detach from timelines in healing is to give space for wounds to close naturally, without judgment. Forcing speed only deepens the cut. Allowing time without clinging gives rise to gentleness, which is itself part of healing. In spiritual practice, timeline attachment becomes another trap. We want enlightenment quickly, transformation immediately, wisdom on demand. But awakening is not a goal to be achieved by a deadline. It is a process of unfolding. Detachment from timing is essential here, because the very desire for quick results feeds the ego we are trying to dissolve. A flower does not bloom because it is impatient, it blooms because it is ready. In the same way, clarity comes when the conditions are right, not when we demand it. When we free ourselves from timelines, life becomes lighter. Instead of chasing the next milestone, we find joy in the step we are already taking. We stop rushing through life as if the destination will finally bring peace, and instead discover that peace was possible in the journey all along. This does not mean giving up ambition or abandoning goals. It means holding them lightly, working toward them without chaining our happiness to their deadline. Think of the artist who clings to finishing a masterpiece by a certain time. The pressure kills creativity. But when the artist lets go of the timeline, the work flows naturally, sometimes slowly, sometimes in bursts, but always alive. This is how detachment from when unleashes creativity. It removes the chokehold of urgency and allows natural rhythm to guide the process. This teaching also reshapes how we view aging. Many suffer because they feel life is moving too fast or too slow, that they are too young for this or too old for that. These are timelines imposed by society, not by truth. Detachment from such timelines frees us from the tyranny of too late or not yet. It reminds us that every stage has its own gifts, and that comparing one's journey to an artificial schedule only blinds us to what is possible now. The practice of letting go of when is a form of surrender, but not the weak surrender of giving up. It is the strong surrender of trust. To surrender timing is to admit that we do not control the unfolding of life, but that we can still meet it fully with presence and integrity. This surrender is not passive, it is active acceptance. It allows us to act where we can and rest where we must, without drowning in the frustration of unmet deadlines. To live this way requires patience, but not the kind of patience that grits its teeth, waiting for relief. It requires the patience of openness, the patience that says, I am willing to walk with life at its pace, not mine. This kind of patience is not heavy, it is light. It frees the heart from the endless chase and brings a quiet confidence that what is meant will arrive when it must. And so, detachment from timelines becomes another doorway into freedom. It loosens the grip of impatience, dissolves the burden of comparison, heals the arrogance of thinking we know best, and returns us to the richness of now. To release when is not to stop caring, it is to stop clinging. It is to act, to love, to grow, but to let life's seasons unfold in their own rhythm. In that rhythm there is peace, in that rhythm there is freedom, and in that rhythm there is the quiet truth that what is meant for you will never miss you, and what is not meant for you will never stay, no matter how much you chase. When this truth sinks in, the restless question of when begins to dissolve, and with it the endless weight of urgency. What remains is a quieter way of living, steady, open, and free. And once the grip of timelines loosens, another subtle layer of attachment begins to reveal itself, one that hides even deeper than impatience. It is the constant pull of desire, the restless craving that whispers that life will only be complete once we finally have what we want. Desire itself has been painted as the enemy of peace, as though wanting automatically makes us weak or unspiritual. But Buddhism does not simply dismiss desire as something to kill or escape. It sees it as a mirror, a guide, a teacher that can point us toward the attachments we cannot yet see. To walk the path of detachment, we must learn not to hate desire, but to listen to it. Desire has a voice, and it often speaks louder when we resist it. The moment you say to yourself, I should not want this, the wanting grows stronger. This is why repression never brings freedom. It only buries desire where it festers. The wiser approach is to meet it directly and ask, what is this longing revealing? What hidden need lies beneath it? In this way, desire becomes a teacher, not an enemy. When we look closely at what we crave, we begin to uncover the invisible chains of attachment that keep us restless. Think of someone longing endlessly for recognition. The desire itself is not evil. It points to a deeper attachment to self-worth being tied to others' approval. The desire for recognition becomes the teacher, showing where freedom is lacking. Or consider the desire for control in relationships. That craving reveals the fear of abandonment or betrayal that lies unexamined. Without desire exposing these wounds, they remain hidden. In this way, unmet desires act like lanterns, lighting up the corners of the mind where attachment quietly resides. The danger comes when we mistake the surface desire for the solution. We chase money believing it will bring security, but the real need is for safety within ourselves. We chase beauty believing it will bring love, but the deeper desire is to feel seen and valued. We chase power believing it will bring freedom, but the hidden craving is to escape vulnerability. Each desire is like a signpost pointing to the root attachment beneath. If we only follow the sign without looking deeper, we become lost in endless craving. If we pause and study the sign, we find the doorway to growth. Buddhism teaches that desire, or tanha, is one of the causes of suffering because it binds us to the illusion that fulfillment lies outside of us. But this teaching is not meant to demonize desire. It is meant to show us that the energy of desire can be transformed. When desire is seen clearly, it becomes wisdom. The fire of craving, when understood, becomes the light of awareness. The very thing that once enslaved us becomes the key to freedom, if we are willing to look honestly at what it reveals. This way of seeing changes how we respond to frustration. Instead of seeing unmet desires as failures, we begin to view them as opportunities. Each disappointment becomes a mirror showing us what we cling to. The job that slips away reveals our attachment to identity through career. The unreturned love reveals our attachment to being chosen. The delayed success reveals our attachment to external validation. These unmet desires are not punishments, they are lessons. They strip away illusions so that we can see the truth of where we are still bound. There is also a tenderness in this teaching. When we realize that desire is a teacher, we stop shaming ourselves for wanting. Too often, spirituality is twisted into self-rejection, telling us that any longing is weakness, but to want is human. The key is not to deny it, but to study it, to listen with compassion, and to trace it back to the root. This softens the harshness of practice and allows us to grow with patience rather than self-condemnation. Desire can also teach us about impermanence. Notice how the object of craving shifts over time. What you desperately wanted 10 years ago may no longer matter today. The desires of childhood give way to the desires of adulthood, and those too will fade. By watching the changing face of desire, we learn that no object of craving can be the ultimate answer. This realization does not make desire disappear, but it lessens its grip because we see that its promises are temporary. Unmet desires also show us where we confuse means with ends. We often believe that the thing we want is the final goal, but in truth, it is usually a stand-in for something deeper. A person may crave wealth, but beneath it lies the desire for stability. Another may crave admiration, but beneath it lies the desire to feel worthy. When the surface desire is unmet, the deeper need is revealed. This process is uncomfortable, but it is the very discomfort that brings growth. Another aspect of desire as a teacher is that it shows us where we place our power outside ourselves. Each time we say, "I cannot be happy until I have this," we hand our freedom over to something external. By noticing this, we are given the chance to reclaim that power. We begin to see that while desires may arise, our peace does not have to be held hostage by their fulfillment. This recognition is not indifference, it is liberation. In practice, this means pausing when desire arises and asking deeper questions. Instead of rushing to satisfy it, we can ask, what is this longing pointing to? What fear or belief sits beneath it? This does not mean denying pleasure or rejecting goals, but rather engaging with desire consciously instead of blindly. A desire may still be pursued, but now it is pursued with awareness rather than compulsion. This difference changes everything. It also reshapes how we view failure. If desire is only an enemy, then failure is unbearable, because it means we are trapped in craving with no escape. But if desire is a teacher, failure becomes instruction. Every disappointment teaches us where we were attached, where we expected life to bend to our will. In this sense, unmet desires are some of the most valuable teachers, because they strip away illusions faster than success ever could. This perspective also deepens compassion for others. When we see that everyone's desires are pointing to hidden attachments and unmet needs, we stop judging people for what they want. Instead of mocking someone for chasing fame or wealth, we recognize the deeper longing beneath, perhaps the desire to feel safe, loved, or free. This recognition allows us to meet others with understanding, not scorn. Compassion grows when we see that beneath all desires lies the same human longing to be whole. Desire, when viewed in this way, also reshapes motivation. Instead of being driven purely by craving, we begin to act from awareness. We may still pursue goals, relationships, or success, but we do so with the understanding that none of these will complete us. They may enrich life, but they are not life's foundation. This subtle shift changes the quality of our striving. It becomes lighter, freer, less desperate. We engage fully, but without the illusion that fulfillment depends on the outcome. In spiritual practice, unmet desires are often the turning points that push seekers deeper. A meditator may desire blissful states, only to discover that clinging to them blocks true awakening. A devotee may desire visions or signs, only to find that chasing them distracts from genuine transformation. In these cases, desire itself becomes the obstacle and the teacher simultaneously. By confronting the craving for spiritual highs, the practitioner learns that true freedom lies beyond all grasping. This process is not about erasing desire, but transforming the relationship to it. When desire arises, instead of saying, "This is bad," we say, "This is a lesson." Each longing becomes a question. What is this pointing to? Where am I still holding on? What illusion am I feeding? By turning desire into inquiry, the same force that once enslaved us now becomes fuel for awakening. There is also beauty in recognizing that desire is what draws us to the path in the first place. The desire for truth, the longing for peace, the hunger for freedom, these too are desires. Without them, we would not begin the journey at all. Buddhism does not ask us to extinguish this spark. It asks us to refine it. Over time, crude desires for fleeting things transform into noble desires for wisdom and compassion. Desire evolves, and in its evolution, it guides us closer to freedom. Detachment from desire, then, is not a denial of life's longings. It is the art of holding them lightly, listening to them, learning from them, and releasing the illusion that they hold the key to our wholeness. Desire is not the enemy. Ignorance of desire is. When we see it clearly, we are no longer trapped by it. We can honor its teaching and let it go, moving with greater clarity and peace. And so, the lesson unfolds. Unmet desires are not curses, they are guides. They shine a light on the attachments we must face, the illusions we must dissolve, the truths we must embrace. To treat desire as a teacher is to transform every craving, every frustration, every disappointment into an opportunity for wisdom. And this wisdom, when lived, becomes the foundation for deeper freedom, the kind that no fulfilled desire could ever give. And after seeing how desire itself can become a teacher, a deeper question arises. Who is it that desires? Who is it that claims ownership over longings, failures, and even progress on the path? Beneath every craving, every attachment, every illusion, there is a subtle voice whispering, "This is me. This is who I am." It is the voice of identity, the mask of ego, and perhaps the most difficult attachment to loosen, because unlike possessions or relationships, identity feels inseparable from existence itself. We can see the danger of clinging to wealth. We can see the pain of clinging to timelines, but clinging to identity hides itself so well that we often mistake it for truth. The ego's most clever disguise shows up in spiritual growth itself. We begin the path sincerely, wanting to be free of suffering, wanting to understand life more deeply. But as progress comes, the ego slips back in through the side door, wearing new clothes. Instead of "I am wealthy" or "I am successful," it becomes "I am wise," "I am spiritual," "I am enlightened." What once seemed like freedom quietly transforms into another chain, gilded in the language of awakening. This is why detachment from identity is perhaps the highest and most subtle practice of all. To understand why identity clings so tightly, we must first see how the mind builds it. Identity is constructed from stories, the narrative that says, "This is who I am." These stories can be about achievements, failures, roles, beliefs, or labels. They can be external, like "I am a teacher, a parent, a healer," or internal, like "I am strong, I am broken, I am spiritual." None of these stories are inherently harmful, but the problem comes when we cling to them as absolute. When life contradicts them, suffering begins. If you are attached to being wise, every mistake becomes a threat. If you are attached to being compassionate, every moment of anger becomes shame. The identity itself becomes the prison. In spiritual practice, this is even more deceptive, because the labels feel noble. To call oneself spiritual or awakened seems harmless, even inspiring, but the more tightly we cling to these identities, the more subtle pride and fear grow. Pride arises in comparison. "I am more awakened than others." Fear arises in insecurity. "What if I lose my progress? What if people no longer see me as spiritual?" Both pride and fear reveal attachment. The self-image of being spiritual becomes a burden rather than a liberation. Detachment from identity does not mean erasing individuality. It means loosening the grip on the stories we tell ourselves, recognizing that they are temporary roles, not permanent truth. Just as we outgrow clothes, we outgrow identities. But when we cling to them, we refuse to grow. The irony is that in the name of growth, many people become stuck in the identity of the one who grows. In chasing spirituality, they cling to the image of being spiritual and block the very freedom they seek. The Buddha warned against this subtle trap, calling it Sakkaya Ditthi, the view of self. He taught that suffering continues as long as we cling to I, me, mine. Even the attachment to "I am awakened" is still a form of bondage. True detachment is the release not only of objects and desires, but of the very sense of self that clings to them. Without this release, even spiritual practice becomes another possession. One way to see this clearly is to notice how identity reacts when threatened. If someone questions your beliefs, do you feel defensive? If someone doubts your wisdom, do you feel anger? These reactions reveal the tightness of attachment. When identity is held loosely, challenges are not threats, they are opportunities. When identity is clung to, every challenge feels like an attack on existence itself. Detachment from identity transforms criticism into learning, failure into growth, and uncertainty into openness. There is also a hidden exhaustion in clinging to identity. To constantly maintain the story of who you are requires effort. If you are attached to being kind, you must suppress anger at all costs. If you are attached to being strong, you must hide weakness from others. If you are attached to being spiritual, you must constantly perform wisdom. This performance becomes heavy because it is driven by fear of being exposed as something else. Detachment lightens this weight by allowing you to simply be without the burden of maintaining an image. This detachment is not about indifference to growth, but about sincerity. When you are detached from the identity of being spiritual, you can engage in practice honestly, without needing to prove anything. You meditate because it brings clarity, not because it makes you appear enlightened. You act compassionately because compassion flows, not because you want others to call you kind. Detachment purifies motivation, stripping away the ego's disguise. It also brings humility. Identity clings to comparison: who is ahead, who is behind, who is superior. Detachment dissolves this need to measure. The path becomes your own, not a race. Humility arises naturally, because without the ego's mask, there is no need to be more than or less than anyone else. The journey becomes about truth, not about image. Detachment from identity also reveals the fluidity of self. When we stop clinging, we begin to see that identity is not fixed, but shifting. You are not the same person you were yesterday, nor will you be the same tomorrow. Roles, beliefs, emotions, and qualities rise and fall like waves. To cling to any one wave is to drown. To detach is to rest in the ocean itself, the deeper awareness that holds all waves, but is bound by none. This insight transforms suffering. Much of pain comes from the belief that this is me. If you identify with sadness, you say, I am sad, and the sadness feels permanent. If you identify with failure, you say, I am a failure, and the weight becomes unbearable. But when identity loosens, sadness becomes, sadness is here. Failure becomes, failure has happened. The experience is still real, but it is no longer the definition of self. This subtle shift opens space for healing, because the self is no longer trapped in a single moment. The danger of ego disguised as spirituality is that it blocks this shift. Instead of dissolving identity, it replaces one mask with another. The mask of wisdom, the mask of purity, the mask of enlightenment. These masks can be harder to drop than worldly ones, because they seem virtuous. But they are still masks, and they still bind. True detachment requires the courage to even let go of the identity of being someone who has let go. This courage is not small. To loosen identity feels like death, because the ego whispers that without it, nothing remains. But what actually falls away is not life, but illusion. What remains is awareness itself, the witness that has always been present, beyond all roles and labels. To rest in this awareness is the essence of detachment from identity. It is not nothingness, but spaciousness, not absence, but freedom. And here lies the paradox. Only when we release the need to be spiritual do we embody true spirituality. Only when we stop clinging to the image of awakening do we awaken. Detachment from identity clears the path of subtle ego traps and allows practice to become what it was always meant to be: a return to simplicity, a return to clarity, a return to freedom beyond names and masks. When this truth is lived, even the phrase, "I am spiritual," loses its grip. There is no longer a need to declare, to compare, to perform. There is only the ongoing unfolding of awareness, silent and steady. And in this unfolding, the ego's disguise falls away, revealing that freedom was never about building a perfect identity, but about letting go of the need for one at all. And when the masks of identity begin to fall away, something even more profound becomes clear. All the roles we cling to, all the stories we tell ourselves, all the images we build are held together by a fragile thread, the illusion that anything can last. Beneath every attachment, whether to people, success, status, or even to the idea of ourselves, lies a refusal to face the truth of impermanence. Nothing we touch, no matter how beautiful or painful, will remain unchanged. The ego resists this truth because it wants stability, it wants permanence, it wants guarantees. But the heart finds its deepest freedom the moment it accepts that everything good or bad will pass. Impermanence is not a punishment, it is the very nature of life. Every breath we take is proof. Inhaling cannot last, it must give way to exhaling. The seasons shift, the body ages, relationships evolve, and moments vanish as soon as they arrive. To resist this truth is to live in constant struggle. To accept it is to be liberated from the fear of loss and the obsession with control. The essence of suffering is not that things change, but that we expect them not to. This acceptance transforms how we relate to joy. When we cling to happiness as if it must last forever, we poison it with fear. We cannot fully enjoy a beautiful moment because we are already grieving its end. But when we embrace impermanence, we savor joy without chains. A moment of laughter, a sunset, a touch all become precious not because they will last, but because they will not. The awareness of impermanence turns ordinary experiences into treasures. Gratitude flows naturally, because nothing is taken for granted. It also transforms how we hold pain. When suffering comes, the mind often says, "This will never end," and despair grows heavy. But impermanence reminds us that even the sharpest pain softens with time. No emotion, no matter how intense, can stay forever. Accepting this truth gives us the patience to endure without collapsing. Pain is still real, but it is no longer eternal in our minds. This simple shift dissolves much of the hopelessness that feeds suffering. Impermanence also reshapes our relationships. So often, conflict arises because we treat people as though they will never change. We expect them to remain the same, to hold the same opinions, to play the same roles in our lives. But every person is in motion, just like us. To accept impermanence is to honor this motion, to allow people the space to evolve. Love becomes freer because it is not chained to rigid expectations. Loss becomes gentler because we knew all along that nothing could be held forever. Instead of clinging, we learn to appreciate. The fear of death itself softens in the light of impermanence. What frightens us is not only the end, but the illusion that death is unnatural. Yet everything in life points toward this truth. What is born will pass. To resist this truth creates terror. To accept it creates peace. Awareness of mortality is not meant to depress us, but to awaken us. It sharpens our appreciation of each breath, each connection, each opportunity. Death is not a thief of meaning, but a giver of it, because it reminds us that every moment matters. Impermanence also dismantles pride and despair. When success comes, we may cling to it as though it will define us forever. When failure comes, we may collapse as though it will bury us forever. Both are illusions. Success fades, failure fades, and life continues to unfold. By accepting this, we neither inflate with victory nor drown in defeat. We meet each state with balance, knowing it is temporary. This balance is the freedom of equanimity, the ability to remain steady while the world shifts endlessly around us. The refusal to accept impermanence often shows up as control. We tighten our grip on relationships, on possessions, on plans, believing that if we hold tightly enough, nothing will slip away. But the truth is that clinging accelerates suffering. What we grip only cuts us more deeply when it changes, as it inevitably will. Acceptance of impermanence teaches us to hold life gently, like holding water in open hands. It may pass through, but in that openness, there is no struggle, only flow. In practice, this means bringing awareness to the smallest shifts. Watching the body breathe, noticing how each inhalation ends, how each sensation arises and falls, trains us to see impermanence directly. Observing thoughts and emotions with the same clarity reveals their fleeting nature. Even anger, which feels overwhelming in the moment, changes when observed closely. It rises, peaks, and falls. Through this practice, the truth of impermanence stops being a theory and becomes lived experience. Impermanence also teaches forgiveness. Grudges live on the belief that someone will always be the same person who hurt us. But when we recognize that people change, that even those who harmed us are in motion, we loosen the grip of resentment. This does not erase responsibility, but it opens the door to compassion. Just as we are not the same as we were in the past, neither are they. Acceptance of impermanence allows us to release the frozen image we hold of others and find peace in letting go. It also inspires courage. Many people delay their dreams, believing there will always be more time. But impermanence reminds us that time is not guaranteed. This awareness does not make life heavier, it makes it urgent in a sacred way. We speak the words of love while there is still time. We pursue the paths that matter while we can. We savor the moments available rather than postponing them for an uncertain future. Acceptance of impermanence is a call to live fully, not someday, but now. Even our spiritual practice deepens when we embrace impermanence. Meditation becomes not about reaching some final, permanent state, but about resting in the ever-changing flow of experience. Insight grows because we stop resisting change and begin observing it with clarity. This opens the door to wisdom, because wisdom is nothing more than seeing reality as it is. And reality is impermanent. The liberation in impermanence is not about abandoning life, but engaging it more fully. When you know that everything passes, you stop wasting energy trying to freeze it. You allow joy to be joy without fearing its end. You allow grief to be grief without believing it will destroy you. You allow love to be love without trying to own it forever. This is freedom not from change, but through change. And in this freedom, a profound gratitude arises. Every sunrise becomes a gift because you know it will not last. Every embrace becomes sacred because you know it cannot be repeated in exactly the same way. Every breath becomes precious because you know it is one less in the span of a life. Gratitude is born from the awareness that nothing is owed and nothing is permanent. To accept impermanence is to finally align with the truth of existence. It does not mean we stop feeling joy or sorrow. It means we stop resisting their flow. It does not mean we stop loving. It means we stop demanding that love remain unchanged. It does not mean we stop striving. It means we stop attaching to results as permanent. This acceptance is not resignation, it is liberation. Because only when we stop fighting change do we discover the stillness that has always been present beneath it. And so the practice becomes simple but profound. Notice change, honor it, release the illusion of permanence, and rest in the freedom that follows. In this freedom, life is not diminished, it is intensified. Every moment, every connection, every breath becomes more radiant, because we finally understand how fragile, fleeting, and sacred it truly is. And as the truth of impermanence settles deeper into the heart, a new question rises that strikes at the center of human experience. How do we love in a world where nothing lasts? If everything changes, if people come and go, if even the most cherished bonds cannot be held forever, how do we open ourselves to love without being shattered by loss? This is where the wisdom of non-attachment in relationships begins to shine. It does not mean withholding love, nor does it mean keeping others at a distance. It means loving fully, with depth and sincerity, while honoring the freedom and impermanence of the other. Attachment in relationships often masquerades as devotion. We tell ourselves that to cling tightly is proof of love, that jealousy is a sign of care, that control is a form of protection. Yet these patterns do not arise from love, they arise from fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of change. The heart believes that if it holds tightly enough, it can freeze love in place. But this grasping suffocates the very thing it longs to preserve. Non-attachment, by contrast, allows love to breathe. It is the open hand instead of the clenched fist, the willingness to cherish without owning, the courage to be present without demanding permanence. When love is entangled with possession, it becomes conditional. We begin to measure the other by how well they meet our needs, how closely they align with our expectations. In this way, the relationship stops being a meeting of two free beings and becomes a contract of control. But non-attachment reveals a different way. It says, "I love you not because you fulfill my conditions, but because love flows freely. I do not demand that you remain the same or that you exist solely to satisfy me. I honor your freedom as much as my own. In this honoring, love grows stronger, not weaker." This principle dismantles the illusions of ownership. We often speak of partners as my husband, my wife, my friend. These words are convenient, but they conceal a dangerous belief that another person can be possessed like an object. The truth is that no one belongs to us. People are not property, they are living, changing beings. Non-attachment does not deny closeness, it enriches it by removing the chains of ownership. To say "I love you" with non-attachment means I celebrate your presence, but I do not own your being. Non-attachment in relationships also dissolves jealousy. Jealousy thrives on the belief that love is a scarce resource, that if someone else receives affection, we will have less. But true love is not diminished by sharing, it expands. When we practice non-attachment, we see that the love we give and the love others receive are not in competition. This perspective loosens the grip of insecurity and allows us to trust more deeply. Trust becomes less about guarantees of permanence and more about the freedom to choose one another again and again in the present moment. At its core, non-attachment is about presence. When we cling to permanence, we miss the beauty of what is unfolding now. We look into the eyes of a loved one, but think of how to keep them forever. We share a moment of laughter, but worry about when it will end. Non-attachment brings us back to the moment, allowing us to taste the fullness of love as it is, without being haunted by its eventual change. In this way, every gesture, every word, every touch becomes sacred because we know it cannot be repeated in the same form. Non-attachment does not weaken commitment. Many fear that letting go of possession means abandoning loyalty, but the opposite is true. When love is free from chains, it becomes more resilient. Commitment born from attachment is fragile because it depends on conditions remaining the same. Commitment born from non-attachment is steady because it is rooted in choice, not compulsion. To say, "I am with you in freedom," is far more powerful than to say it out of fear or dependence. It also changes how we respond to conflict. In attachment, conflict is often amplified by ego. We cling to being right, to having the upper hand, to controlling the narrative. But in non-attachment, the priority shifts from control to understanding. We no longer need to dominate the other because our identity is not chained to being right. This allows space for listening, for humility, for compromise. Conflict does not vanish, but it softens, because love is no longer entangled with the need to win. Non-attachment also invites us to see our partners and loved ones as mirrors. Every irritation, every longing, every fear they awaken in us reveals our own attachments. Instead of blaming them for not meeting our demands, we can ask, what is this reaction showing me about myself? In this way, relationships become paths of growth, each moment of friction an opportunity to loosen the grip of ego. This is not about tolerating harm, but about using everyday tensions as openings to greater self-awareness. The acceptance of impermanence plays a vital role here. Every relationship will change, whether through evolving dynamics, distance, or death. Clinging to the fantasy of permanence sets us up for heartbreak, but when we accept change, we love more courageously. We no longer waste energy resisting the inevitable. Instead, we pour it into cherishing the time we have. This awareness turns ordinary days into treasures and ordinary words into blessings. The fragility of life makes love more urgent, more precious, more alive. Non-attachment also allows us to release gracefully when relationships end. Whether through breakup, estrangement, or loss, endings are part of the fabric of life. Attachment makes these endings devastating because it insists that the relationship should have lasted forever. Non-attachment allows grief without bondage. We mourn what was, we honor what we shared, but we do not collapse under the illusion that it should have been permanent. This grace allows love to leave without leaving scars of bitterness. In family relationships, non-attachment has its own expression. Parents who cling tightly to their children often mistake control for care. But true care honors the child's freedom to grow, to make mistakes, to become someone new. Non-attachment here means loving fully while letting go of ownership over the child's path. It is the strength to say, I will walk beside you, but I will not imprison you with my expectations. This freedom allows love between parent and child to mature into respect rather than suffocation. Friendships too benefit from this wisdom. Friends may drift apart, grow in different directions, or reconnect after years apart. Attachment tries to freeze the bond, demanding constant closeness. Non-attachment accepts the ebb and flow, trusting that true friendship is not defined by frequency, but by sincerity. This acceptance removes the guilt and pressure that often burden friendships, allowing them to breathe and evolve naturally. Even romantic love, often seen as the pinnacle of attachment, becomes deeper in non-attachment. Instead of consuming passion that burns out in jealousy and control, love becomes a steady flame, nourished by freedom. You can adore someone without needing to own them, desire them without fearing their absence, care for them without trying to control their choices. This kind of love is not weaker, it is indestructible because it is not tied to possession. Non-attachment also transforms self-love. Many people treat themselves as possessions, demanding perfection, clinging to rigid self-images. By practicing non-attachment toward ourselves, we allow space to grow and change without judgment. This self-freedom strengthens all other relationships, because the less we cling to an identity, the less we demand others to validate it. Ultimately, non-attachment in relationships teaches us that love is not about holding on, but about letting flow. It is not about security through control, but about trust through presence. It is not about permanence, but about depth in the moment. This kind of love may not look like the fairy tales of possession, but it carries a truth far more enduring. It is the love that remains even when circumstances shift, even when forms dissolve, because it is not bound to conditions, it is rooted in freedom. To love without possessing is to love with open eyes. It is to see the fragility of life and choose to pour yourself into it anyway. It is to know that nothing lasts forever, and yet to give yourself fully in each moment. This is not lesser love, it is greater love, purified of fear and control. It is the love that heals, the love that liberates, the love that does not bind but sets free. And in this freedom, love reaches its truest form. And after discovering the freedom of loving without possession, there is still a truth that refuses to be ignored. No matter how much wisdom we gather, no matter how gently we loosen our grip, life still cuts us open. Loss still comes. Disappointment still arrives. The heart still aches. It is easy to embrace detachment when things flow smoothly, but it is in suffering that the true depth of detachment is tested. Pain is not an obstacle on the path. It is often the very doorway. For many, the lessons that books cannot teach, the moments of stillness cannot reveal, suffering itself delivers with unshakable clarity. Suffering reveals what we cling to. A broken heart exposes the way we tied our worth to another's presence. Financial loss exposes the way we built our identity around stability and success. Illness exposes the way we assumed control over the body's fate. Without suffering, these attachments remain hidden, comfortably tucked away beneath routine. But when the ground is pulled out from under us, the chains rattle loudly, and we finally see what we have been gripping all along. This is why pain becomes such a powerful teacher. It forces us to confront illusions we would rather avoid. We do not want to admit that nothing lasts. We do not want to face that we cannot control others. We do not want to accept that even the body will one day fail. Yet, when suffering arrives, these truths stand before us with undeniable force. To resist them is to multiply the pain. To accept them is to begin to awaken. It is often said in Buddhist teaching that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is the raw experience, loss, illness, rejection, aging. Suffering is what the mind builds around it. The resistance, the refusal, the story of why me, and this should not be happening. Detachment begins when we separate the two. Pain will arise, but suffering need not dominate us. By learning from pain, instead of resenting it, we discover the doorway into freedom. Consider grief. When someone we love dies, the pain is real and sharp. But the suffering often comes from the demand that they should still be here, that life should have given us more time, that death should have waited. This resistance to impermanence tightens the wound. Yet those who allow grief to flow, who do not resist its waves, often emerge with a deeper appreciation for life, with a gentler love, with less fear of endings. The loss did not destroy them, it reshaped them. Suffering cracked the shell of attachment and revealed a wider horizon. Suffering also humbles the ego. When life is comfortable, the ego thrives on illusions of control. We convince ourselves that we are the architects of our destiny, that we can hold everything together by sheer effort. But suffering strips away this arrogance. It shows us how fragile we are, how dependent, how interconnected. And in this humility, compassion arises. Those who have known deep suffering often carry an ability to sit with the suffering of others without judgment. Their own wounds have made them more tender. Pain teaches us not only detachment, but also compassion. Because once you have been broken, you understand the fragility of all. Detachment through suffering is not about becoming numb, it is about becoming real. When you have walked through fire, trivial attachments lose their grip. The small irritations that once consumed you seem weightless compared to what you have endured. Suffering burns away the unnecessary, leaving only what matters. This clarity is one of its greatest gifts. Another lesson suffering teaches is the futility of resistance. So much of pain is magnified because we fight it, deny it, push it away. Yet the more we resist, the stronger it grows. At some point, exhaustion sets in, and we are forced to let go. This surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. In that letting go, we discover the strength we never knew we had. The moment we stop clinging, even in the middle of pain, a space of peace opens. It does not erase the hardship, but it changes how we hold it. Suffering also reveals the depth of impermanence in a way nothing else can. We may accept change intellectually, but when life takes something we love, the truth of impermanence is no longer a concept. It is carved into our bones. And once this truth is embodied, we can no longer live as if things will stay the same. We begin to cherish more deeply, to love more honestly, to loosen our grip more willingly. The pain of loss teaches us not to waste time clinging to illusions. In spiritual practice, suffering often becomes the catalyst for transformation. Few people begin the path from comfort alone. It is suffering that pushes them to seek, that cracks open the longing for truth. Illness, heartbreak, failure, these become turning points, gateways to a deeper search for meaning. Without them, many would remain asleep in routine. Suffering shocks us awake, showing us that life as we have been living it is unsustainable. This shock is painful, but it is also sacred, and yet not all who suffer awaken. Some become bitter, hardened, resentful. What makes the difference? The willingness to learn from suffering rather than resist it. Detachment turns pain into teacher, while attachment turns pain into poison. If we cling to the idea that suffering should not exist, we are consumed by it. If we open to it as a messenger, we are transformed by it. This is why Buddhism places suffering at the very beginning of the Four Noble Truths. To see suffering clearly is the starting point of liberation. The Buddha did not hide from it, nor did he glorify it. He pointed to it as reality, as the teacher that guides us toward freedom. Without suffering, detachment remains theory. With suffering, detachment becomes necessity. Suffering also teaches gratitude. When you have lost, when you have been stripped bare, even the smallest joys shine brighter. A simple meal, a kind word, a moment of stillness all become treasures. This shift in perspective is not forced. It is born from having known the opposite. In this way, suffering deepens our capacity for appreciation. It teaches us not to take for granted what is here, because we know firsthand how fragile it is. Pain also sharpens the present. When life wounds us, the past becomes heavy with regret, and the future with fear. The only place left to breathe is now. This forced presence, while uncomfortable, reveals the truth the mind often avoids, that life can only be lived in this moment. Suffering drives us back to presence, and in presence, the seeds of detachment begin to grow. In relationships, suffering often reveals the difference between attachment and love. Heartbreak shows us how much of what we called love was actually possession. Betrayal shows us how much we clung to illusions about others. Loss shows us how deeply we demanded permanence. While painful, these lessons strip away false notions of love and open the possibility of a love less bound by chains. Suffering dismantles illusions so that love can be reborn in freedom. Even the body itself teaches through pain. Illness, aging, and injury remind us that we cannot cling to youth, strength, or even health. For many, these experiences awaken detachment more powerfully than any teaching. To face the body's fragility is to confront the impermanence we often ignore. While difficult, it offers wisdom that comfort could never deliver. And so suffering, far from being an obstacle, is often the most effective gateway to detachment. It shatters illusions, humbles the ego, deepens compassion, sharpens gratitude, and forces presence. It strips away what is false so that we can see what is true. This does not mean seeking out suffering, but meeting it when it comes with openness rather than resistance. To suffer is to be human. To learn from suffering is to awaken. When we allow suffering to teach us, the chains of attachment loosen. We stop demanding permanence from what cannot last. We stop resisting truths that cannot be avoided. We stop shrinking from life's fragility and instead embrace it with open eyes. In this way, pain becomes not just something to endure, but a sacred guide, leading us to the freedom that comfort alone could never reveal. And after walking through the lessons that suffering brings, the path opens into something even more practical, something that touches every corner of our daily lives. Suffering shows us the cost of clinging, but the question remains, how do we live without that constant grasping? How do we work, love, create, and own without being trapped by possession? Buddhism calls this practice non-grasping, and it is not about rejecting life, but learning to hold it lightly, engaging fully while refusing to be chained. Non-grasping is not apathy. It does not tell you to walk through life empty-handed, refusing all bonds or responsibilities. It teaches the art of touching everything without letting it stick to you. A person who practices non-grasping can work with passion, love with depth, and enjoy possessions without being enslaved by them. The difference lies in the grip. Grasping says, "This must be mine, this must stay, this defines me." Non-grasping says, "This is here now, I will honor it, and when it changes, I will release it." This principle reshapes the way we approach work. Many people tie their identity and worth to achievements. Success becomes a possession, something they must cling to for meaning. Failure becomes unbearable because it feels like personal annihilation. Non-grasping allows us to engage in work wholeheartedly, but without letting results define us. You still strive, you still give your best, but you release the obsession with ownership of outcomes. The effort itself becomes the reward. This shift frees you from burnout because your energy no longer leaks into fear of failure or endless comparison. In relationships, non-grasping brings a quiet strength. Grasping tries to hold people in place, to freeze them into the roles we want them to play. But no one can remain fixed. Everyone changes. Non-grasping honors this truth. It allows us to love without control, to support without suffocation. We can walk beside others without trying to carry them in chains. And when relationships evolve or end, the pain is real, but it is not doubled by the illusion that they were ever ours to keep. Possessions, too, reveal the practice of non-grasping. The world constantly whispers that happiness lies in having more, holding more, securing more. But the more we cling to things, the heavier life becomes. Non-grasping does not reject possessions. It transforms the way we relate to them. You can own a home without being owned by it, enjoy wealth without fearing its loss, use tools and technology without being enslaved by the need for the newest and best. This lightness turns material life from a burden into a resource, something to use wisely without letting it consume your freedom. Non-grasping also reshapes how we handle change. Grasping clings to the past, replaying what once was. It clings to the future, demanding certainty. Non-grasping accepts that life is in motion. It says yes to change, not because it is easy, but because it is real. This acceptance makes us flexible. Instead of breaking under the weight of change, we bend with it. This resilience is one of the most powerful gifts of non-grasping. In daily practice, non-grasping can be cultivated through mindfulness. By observing thoughts and emotions without clinging to them, we train the mind to let go. Anger arises. We notice it without identifying as I am anger. Joy arises. We savor it without demanding that it last. In this way, the mind learns the rhythm of holding and releasing. Life becomes less like a battlefield of control and more like a dance of presence. The beauty of non-grasping is that it amplifies gratitude. When you know you cannot hold something forever, you cherish it more deeply. A conversation, a meal, a moment of rest, all become richer when you no longer grasp at their permanence. Instead of lamenting their passing, you appreciate their presence. This gratitude turns ordinary moments into extraordinary gifts, not because they last, but because you are awake to them while they are here. Non-grasping also heals relationships with the self. Many people cling to fixed self-images. I must always be strong. I cannot make mistakes. I must be successful. These graspings create inner conflict because life inevitably contradicts them. By practicing non-grasping, we allow ourselves to change, to evolve, to be imperfect. We stop clutching at old versions of ourselves and begin to honor the person we are becoming. This self-freedom removes the pressure of constant performance and allows genuine growth. There is also a quiet courage in non-grasping. Grasping clings because it fears emptiness. It believes that without possessions, without roles, without certainty, there will be nothing left. But non-grasping shows us that release does not leave us empty. It leaves us spacious. It opens us to new experiences, new perspectives, new forms of love. What the ego fears as loss, the heart discovers as freedom. Even small practices in daily life can cultivate this wisdom. Notice how often you grasp for control in conversations, waiting to be heard instead of truly listening. Notice how often you grasp at pleasure, prolonging it beyond its natural life. Notice how often you grasp at plans, demanding that life follow your script. Each moment of awareness is a chance to release, to soften, to practice the open hand instead of the closed fist. Non-grasping also invites us into service. When we give without clinging to recognition, our actions are pure. When we help without needing repayment, compassion flows freely. Service becomes light rather than heavy, because it is not burdened with expectations. This kind of giving nourishes both giver and receiver, creating ripples of kindness that are not chained by contracts of ownership. In times of uncertainty, non-grasping becomes even more vital. When the future is unclear, the grasping mind panics, trying to predict, control, and secure. Non-grasping does not erase uncertainty, but it teaches us to rest within it, to act where we can, to release where we cannot. This practice brings a calm strength, the ability to stand in the unknown without collapsing. Non-grasping is not the absence of love, work, or joy. It is the presence of them without the chains of possession. It is the courage to fully engage without demanding permanence. It is the wisdom to let life flow through your hands without trying to trap it. And in this flow, life becomes lighter, clearer, freer. When lived, non-grasping turns daily life into practice. Work becomes service rather than self-obsession. Relationships become companionship rather than ownership. Possessions become tools rather than chains. The self becomes fluid rather than fixed. And in all of this, freedom arises not freedom from life, but freedom within it. This freedom is not abstract. It is felt in the looseness of the heart, in the ease of breath, in the quiet joy that comes when you stop clinging to what was never yours to hold forever. It is the taste of release in the middle of activity, the peace of knowing that you can engage fully and still remain free. Non-grasping does not take you away from life. It gives life back to you, unburdened, spacious, and alive. And after learning to loosen the grip through non-grasping, another truth begins to surface, one that challenges how we approach effort itself. We often believe that the harder we try, the faster life will reward us. The more we push, the sooner things will fall into place. Yet, the reality we keep facing is far more paradoxical. Sometimes the more we strain, the further the outcome drifts. Sometimes the tighter we chase, the more life resists. And in contrast, when we approach with calm focus, when effort flows without desperation, doors open that struggle alone could never unlock. This paradox of effort is one of the most subtle lessons in detachment, teaching us that pushing too hard can block the very results we long for. The energy behind effort matters as much as the effort itself. Desperation carries the vibration of lack. It shouts to the world, "I do not have this yet, and I cannot be at peace until I do." That energy clings, grasps, and repels. Calm effort, however, carries the energy of trust. It says, "I will give my best, but I am not enslaved by the outcome." This relaxed clarity attracts alignment because it flows with life rather than against it. Both approaches may look the same on the surface: hours of work, persistence, dedication, but beneath, one is driven by fear and the other by freedom. This paradox shows up clearly in relationships. Think of the times when someone pursued another with excessive intensity. The constant need for reassurance, the desperate clinging, the pressure to respond in kind, these things rarely bring closeness. Instead, they create distance. Love flourishes in space, not suffocation. Calm presence invites connection, while desperation pushes it away. The same dynamic plays out in work, in creativity, even in spiritual practice. When we grasp too tightly, we choke the flow. When we loosen, things unfold more naturally. The Buddha's teaching of the middle way points directly to this truth. Too much effort burns out the mind and body. Too little effort breeds stagnation. Balance is the key. Effort that is steady, mindful, and relaxed leads to growth, while effort that is desperate or lazy leads to suffering. The paradox is that discipline is necessary, but obsession is destructive. The art lies in applying yourself fully without chaining your peace to results. In daily life, we often confuse busyness with effectiveness. Grasping effort fills our days with endless tasks, as if constant movement will guarantee progress. Yet, this kind of effort often scatters energy, producing stress rather than results. Calm effort, on the other hand, is precise. It knows when to act, when to pause, when to step back. This clarity does not come from doing nothing, but from working without panic. Non-grasping transforms effort into skillful action. There is also a psychological truth here. Studies in performance psychology show that overthinking and pressure decrease performance. Athletes who try too hard tense their muscles and lose fluidity. Artists who obsess about perfection paralyze their creativity. Students who panic about grades often block their memory recall. In each case, desperate effort sabotages the very outcome it seeks. Detachment allows effort to remain fluid, playful, and effective. Calm effort aligns body and mind in harmony, creating the conditions for excellence without the burden of fear. This principle is also seen in the practice of meditation. Beginners often approach meditation with the idea that they must force the mind into silence. They strain, they resist thoughts, they battle restlessness. The more they push, the noisier the mind becomes. Progress seems impossible, but when they learn to sit calmly, allowing thoughts to rise and fall without clinging, silence arrives naturally. Effort without desperation invites peace. Effort with desperation blocks it. The same principle applies to every area of life. Another layer of the paradox is that desperate effort often reveals attachment to identity. We push too hard because we want to prove something to ourselves, to others, to the world. The grasping is not just for the result, but for the image of who we will be once we achieve it. This is ego's disguise, the belief that effort must validate our worth. Detachment dissolves this illusion. It allows us to act for the sake of the action, not for the identity it promises to secure. When effort becomes pure expression rather than a grasp for validation, it becomes lighter, freer, and, ironically, more successful. Calm effort also nurtures patience. Desperation says, "I must have this now." It demands instant results and collapses when they do not arrive. Calm effort trusts timing. It recognizes that some seeds take longer to sprout, that some doors open only when conditions align. This patience is not passive, it is active perseverance without panic. It allows us to continue working steadily without the weight of frustration. This is why calm effort often outlasts desperate effort. It is sustainable because it does not burn out the spirit. In relationships with possessions, the paradox shows itself too. The more we cling to wealth or status with desperate energy, the more it slips away. We spend recklessly to prove abundance, or we hoard in fear of loss, both of which create imbalance. Calm effort in managing possessions, however, brings stability. It is the steady practice of earning, saving, giving, and enjoying without obsession. Wealth managed with calm effort supports life. Wealth clutched desperately enslaves it. The paradox also reshapes how we approach goals. Ambition driven by desperation often feels like chasing a mirage. No matter how much ground we cover, the goal seems further away. This is because we attach our happiness to reaching it. Calm effort, however, makes the journey itself meaningful. Each step becomes valuable, not just the destination. This shift removes the restless hunger that blocks fulfillment. Goals remain, but they no longer enslave us. There is a quiet confidence in calm effort. Desperation says, "If I don't force this, it will never happen." Calm effort says, "I will do my part, and I trust that life will respond in its way." This trust is not naive, it is rooted in wisdom. We control our actions, not the entire web of conditions that shape results. When we release the illusion of control, we stop wasting energy fighting what is beyond us and direct energy to what we can truly influence. This is why calm effort is powerful. It channels strength into the present rather than scattering it into fear. Even in failure, the paradox remains clear. Desperate effort sees failure as devastation because it means the outcome slipped through our grasp. Calm effort sees failure as feedback, a step on the path. This openness allows resilience. Instead of collapsing in despair, we adjust, learn, and continue. Failure becomes teacher rather than enemy. This transformation is only possible when effort is detached from desperation. The wisdom of the paradox also reveals itself in creativity. Some of the greatest breakthroughs happen not through relentless forcing, but through letting go. Writers speak of inspiration arriving when they stop staring at the blank page. Scientists speak of insights emerging in moments of rest, not in the lab. Musicians find flow when they stop obsessing about the perfect note and simply play. Calm effort creates the conditions for inspiration to arrive because the mind is spacious enough to receive it. The paradox of effort is not about doing less, but about doing differently. It is not about laziness, but about balance. It asks us to work with presence instead of panic, to act with clarity instead of desperation. In this balance, outcomes are often better, but more importantly, peace remains regardless of the outcome. This is the essence of detachment applied to effort. And so, the lesson becomes clear. Trying too hard, fueled by grasping, pushes life away. Calm effort, rooted in trust, invites it closer. To live this way is to embody the middle way, to work, love, create, and grow without being crushed by the hunger for results. In this paradox lies freedom, the freedom to act fully while remaining free, the freedom to strive without being enslaved, the freedom to let life unfold without fear. And after seeing how effort itself can either open doors or close them depending on the spirit behind it, another question naturally arises. How do we carry this wisdom into our relationship with wealth? For money and material comfort are among the strongest attachments humans carry. We chase them with desperation, fearing scarcity, or we reject them altogether, fearing corruption. Both extremes create imbalance. The path of detachment does not demand poverty, nor does it glorify greed. It asks for something far more subtle, to live with abundance while not being bound by it, to walk the middle path where wealth serves life rather than enslaves it. Wealth in itself is neither pure nor poisonous. It is a tool, and like all tools, its impact depends on how it is held. A knife can prepare food or harm. Fire can warm or destroy. Money can bring opportunity, or it can deepen chains. The problem is not the presence of wealth, but the clinging to it, the belief that our value and safety depend entirely on what we own. Detachment reveals that true prosperity is not measured by possessions, but by the freedom to enjoy them without fear, and to release them without despair. When clinging dominates, wealth becomes a trap. Fear of losing it creates anxiety, obsession with increasing it breeds greed, and comparison poisons satisfaction. Many live as prisoners of abundance, unable to rest despite having more than enough. Detachment dissolves these chains by shifting the question from "How much do I have?" to "How lightly can I hold what I have?" This shift transforms wealth from a burden into a blessing. The middle path asks us to cultivate wealth with awareness and to use it with wisdom. On one side lies attachment, the endless hunger for more, where no amount ever feels enough. On the other side lies aversion, the rejection of wealth as corrupt, which often hides its own form of attachment, the pride of poverty, the identity of renunciation. Both are distortions. Detachment walks between them, seeing wealth neither as savior nor as enemy, but as resource. This perspective also redefines success. The world often equates prosperity with luxury, accumulation, and display. But from the view of detachment, prosperity is not about how much you own, but how free you are in your relationship with what you own. A person with modest means but no fear of loss can be more prosperous than a millionaire chained to anxiety. Abundance without detachment is fragile. Detachment turns even simple resources into wealth. Work and wealth are deeply connected, and detachment brings balance here as well. Many people sacrifice health, relationships, and peace of mind in pursuit of money, believing that once they reach a certain level, they can finally rest. But the finish line always moves, because grasping never ends. Detachment breaks this cycle by teaching us to align work with values rather than only profit. Wealth earned with integrity and balance supports life. Wealth earned at the cost of inner peace corrodes it. This middle path also transforms generosity. When attached to wealth, giving feels like loss, a subtraction from security. But with detachment, giving feels natural, because you see wealth as flowing energy rather than fixed possession. What you release returns in forms you cannot predict, not always materially, but in joy, in connection, in freedom. Generosity born from detachment is not obligation, it is freedom expressing itself. At the same time, Detachment prevents carelessness. To hold wealth lightly does not mean to waste it. Responsibility and wisdom remain essential. The middle path means enjoying without clinging and managing without hoarding. It is balance, knowing when to save, when to spend, when to share, when to let go. This balance protects us from both greed and neglect. Wealth also tests attachment to identity. Many define themselves by what they own: the car, the house, the clothing, the status. When these are threatened, self-worth collapses. Detachment removes this fragile link. It allows identity to rest on values, character, and presence rather than possessions. This shift creates stability because external things will always change. When identity is no longer chained to wealth, true confidence grows. The middle path to prosperity also teaches contentment. Contentment is not resignation, it is the recognition that enough is already here. Without contentment, wealth is never enough, because craving always demands more. With contentment, even simple comforts become rich. This does not mean abandoning ambition or growth. It means pursuing them without the poison of restlessness. In this way, prosperity is experienced at every stage, not postponed for some distant future. Detachment also reveals that wealth is not only material. Relationships, knowledge, health, time, peace, these too are forms of wealth. A person who clings only to money while neglecting these other riches lives in poverty of spirit. A person who balances them lives abundantly, even with modest means. This broader understanding of prosperity protects us from the trap of reducing life to numbers. The fear of scarcity often fuels grasping. Many cling to wealth not because they love it, but because they fear losing security. Detachment dissolves this fear by reminding us of impermanence. Nothing can be fully secured, not health, not possessions, not status. But freedom comes from realizing that peace does not depend on guarantees. Detachment replaces the illusion of control with resilience, the ability to adapt no matter what comes. This resilience is the true security wealth alone can never provide. Practical application of this wisdom means asking different questions about money. Instead of, "How can I get more?" ask, "How can I use what I have well?" Instead of, "How can I protect everything?" ask, "How can I live freely with what I hold?" Instead of, "How can I outdo others?" ask, "How can my resources serve what matters most?" These shifts do not decrease prosperity, they deepen it. They align wealth with purpose rather than fear. Even in times of abundance, detachment keeps us grounded. It prevents pride, the illusion that wealth makes us superior. And in times of loss, detachment prevents despair, the illusion that wealth was our only anchor. This equanimity allows us to move through financial highs and lows with dignity. Prosperity, then, is not about constant increase, but about steady freedom. The middle path of wealth is also about relationship with desire. Desires will always arise, but detachment questions them. Is this a genuine need, or is it the ego chasing display? By asking this, we filter out illusions and direct resources toward what truly supports life. Wealth is no longer wasted on endless craving, and the energy of money becomes aligned with clarity. Ultimately, the middle path to prosperity teaches that wealth is best held as a servant, never as a master. It can support freedom, education, health, creativity, and compassion when guided by detachment. But when clung to as the source of identity, it enslaves. Detachment transforms wealth into tool rather than trap, blessing rather than burden. And so prosperity is not denied, but purified. It is abundance without addiction, comfort without dependence, generosity without fear, enjoyment without obsession. This is the freedom of the middle path, where wealth is welcomed but never worshipped, where it is used wisely but never clung to. In this balance, prosperity becomes not just a matter of possessions, but a state of liberation, where life itself is lived with richness that no loss can take away. And once we understand how wealth can be held lightly, serving life without enslaving it, another weight emerges into view, one that money cannot ease, one that prosperity cannot solve. It is the weight of resentment, the heaviness of wounds carried for years, the chains of anger that keep the heart from resting. We speak often of forgiveness, yet few truly know how to reach it, because we confuse forgiveness with receiving apologies or seeing justice served. But real forgiveness begins not with what others do, but with what we are willing to release. Detachment is the bridge. Without detachment, forgiveness feels impossible. With it, the heart learns to breathe again. To forgive while clinging to the demand for an apology is like waiting for rain in a desert. It may never come, and in the waiting, you remain parched. The truth is that many who hurt us will never acknowledge the harm. Some cannot, some will not, and some are no longer here to say the words we crave. If forgiveness depends on them, we remain imprisoned. Detachment dissolves this illusion. It teaches us to let go of the need for their validation. Forgiveness becomes a gift we give ourselves, not a favor we wait to receive. The same is true of justice. The heart longs for balance, for wrongs to be corrected, for wounds to be avenged. Yet life does not always bend to our idea of fairness. Some people escape accountability. Some wounds are never repaired in the way we wish. Clinging to this demand only deepens suffering. Detachment does not deny the value of justice, but it removes the illusion that peace depends on it. Justice may come, or it may not, but our freedom cannot be postponed until it does. Forgiveness rooted in detachment releases this weight, choosing liberation over endless waiting. This release is not weakness. Many resist forgiveness because they believe it excuses harm or invites more of it. But detachment clarifies the truth. Forgiving does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean allowing harm to continue. It means refusing to let the wound define your life. Detachment gives you the strength to say, "This happened, it hurt, and I will not carry its poison any longer." In this way, forgiveness becomes an act of power, not surrender. Forgiveness without detachment is often shallow. We say the words but still cling inside. We release with one hand while holding tightly with the other. Detachment makes forgiveness real because it loosens the grip of expectation. It allows us to let go without conditions. And in that letting go, space opens space for peace, for healing, for new life to grow where bitterness once lived. The heart that refuses forgiveness carries constant tension. Anger and resentment must be maintained, fed by memory and replayed again and again. This drains energy, clouds joy, and burdens every relationship. Detachment breaks the cycle. It allows the wound to be acknowledged without being endlessly nourished. Forgiveness becomes possible because you are no longer trapped in rehearsing what should have been. You accept that the past cannot be rewritten, and in that acceptance, the grip of resentment loosens. This does not happen instantly. Forgiveness through detachment often unfolds in layers. At first, the heart may resist, screaming that letting go means betrayal of your own pain. But with practice, detachment reveals that holding on is the true betrayal, the betrayal of your own freedom. Slowly, the heart begins to see that forgiveness is not a dismissal of the wound, but a refusal to be ruled by it. The wound may remain in memory, but its chains dissolve. In relationships, Forgiveness through detachment allows connections to mend more authentically. When you demand an apology before you forgive, forgiveness becomes a transaction. But when you release the demand, forgiveness becomes unconditional. It does not always mean reconciliation, but it clears the field of bitterness. This clarity allows you to decide wisely whether to continue the relationship or to let it go without hatred. Detachment ensures that the choice is not clouded by the haze of unresolved anger. Inwardly, forgiveness also transforms self-judgment. Many carry resentment toward themselves for past mistakes, choices, or failures. They replay these endlessly, unable to forgive themselves because they cling to the idea that they should have been different. Detachment here means releasing the illusion of a fixed self, recognizing that you acted with the understanding you had at that time. Forgiveness of self arises when you let go of the demand for perfection and open to growth. This is perhaps the hardest forgiveness, but also the most liberating. Detachment also deepens compassion. When we stop clinging to the image of others as permanent villains, we begin to see their humanity. We may not excuse their actions, but we recognize that their harm was born from their own ignorance, fear, or pain. This perspective does not deny responsibility. It widens understanding. Forgiveness flows more easily when we stop demanding that people be more than they were capable of at the time. Compassion is not approval, but it is a doorway to release. Forgiveness through detachment also prevents cycles of harm. When we cling to resentment, we often project it onto others, passing on the same pain we received. Detachment breaks this chain. By releasing the need for revenge, we stop the ripple of harm. The cycle ends with us. This is why forgiveness is not just personal, it is also a gift to the world. On a spiritual level, forgiveness through detachment aligns us with impermanence. The people who hurt us, the pain they caused, even the emotions tied to it, none of these are permanent. Clinging to resentment is an attempt to make the past permanent, to freeze it in place. But when we release, we align with reality. The past is gone, and we are free to live the present without its weight. This alignment brings a profound sense of peace, because we stop demanding that life be something it can never be, unchanging. Forgiveness does not mean that memory vanishes. Detachment does not erase the past, it changes our relationship to it. We remember without chains, without the sting of obsession. The memory becomes information rather than torment. It shapes wisdom without dictating suffering. This transformation is possible only when we let go of the need for repayment. And so, the role of detachment in forgiveness is not small, it is central. Without detachment, forgiveness is a word. With it, forgiveness becomes a lived reality, a freedom that no apology or verdict could ever provide. The heart no longer waits for others to make things right. It finds its own release, its own peace, its own liberation. And in that release, forgiveness ceases to be a duty and becomes a natural expression of freedom. And after seeing how detachment frees the heart through forgiveness, another question rises that shapes how we walk through life itself. What does it mean to act with full presence, yet not cling to results? Many confuse detachment with indifference, believing it means giving half-hearted effort. But the truth is the opposite. Detachment is not about caring less. It is about caring fully for the process while letting go of the chains that bind us to the outcome. This distinction between detachment from outcome and detachment from process is subtle but powerful. To misunderstand it is to risk falling into passivity. To understand it is to unlock a way of living where every step becomes meaningful, even if the destination never arrives. When we cling to outcomes, our energy narrows into obsession. We measure each moment by how close it brings us to the goal, and in doing so, we miss the richness of the journey. A student studies only for grades, not for learning. An artist creates only for applause, not for expression. A worker labors only for promotion, not for excellence. When the outcome is delayed or denied, despair floods in, and the process itself feels wasted. Detachment breaks this illusion. It says, the process matters in itself. The outcome is uncertain, but the effort is real, alive, and transformative. This does not mean the destination is meaningless. Goals give direction, they shape our path. But the grip on the goal is what enslaves us. Detachment allows us to set intentions and move toward them without being shattered if life unfolds differently. The paradox is that by releasing obsession with outcomes, we often reach them more naturally because our energy is not drained by anxiety. Effort flows when we stop clutching at guarantees. Detachment from process, however, is a misunderstanding that must be avoided. Some think detachment means withdrawing effort, being careless, drifting passively, but this is indifference in disguise. True detachment asks for full commitment to the process. The artist must still pick up the brush. The worker must still give their craft. The seeker must still meditate. The parent must still nurture. The difference is that the heart is not enslaved by what follows. You give your best, not because of what it will bring, but because the giving itself is meaningful. The Buddha taught about right effort, which is effort free from craving and aversion. This is not half effort. It is wholehearted action guided by wisdom. To be detached from the outcome is to give your full energy to the step before you, trusting that whatever follows belongs to the flow of conditions. In this way, detachment does not weaken discipline, it strengthens it. Because when you are not crushed by fear of failure, you are free to continue regardless of results. The distinction becomes clear in failure. When attached to outcomes, failure feels devastating because all effort seems wasted. But when committed to the process, failure becomes another step of growth. A runner who trains daily may not win the race, but the discipline, health, and clarity gained are victories in themselves. The outcome may slip away, but the process has already transformed them. This is the freedom of detachment, to know that nothing is wasted when the process is lived fully. It also reshapes how we view success. When chained to outcomes, success inflates the ego. We believe we are superior because results aligned with our desires. But when focused on process, success humbles us because we see that the journey itself was the teacher, and the outcome is simply one expression of many. This perspective prevents pride from distorting growth. Success becomes gratitude rather than possession. Detachment from outcomes also transforms relationships. Many enter bonds with hidden contracts. I will give love if you give it back. I will care if you stay. I will forgive if you change. These are outcome-driven conditions. When unmet, bitterness festers, but when love is rooted in process, in the act of giving without chains, relationships deepen. You love not as a trade, but as an expression of being. The outcome, whether returned or not, no longer defines the value of your love. This does not mean tolerating harm. It means that love flows freely without demanding control. The workplace, too, reveals this teaching. Attachment to outcomes often leads to burnout. Workers sacrifice health and joy chasing promotions, recognition, or financial goals. But those who commit to the process of meaningful work, solving problems, serving others, learning skills, find satisfaction even when recognition lags. Their motivation rests in the value of the work itself, not only in the prize at the end. Detachment makes work sustainable because it nourishes rather than depletes. In creativity, the principle shines brightly. The artist who paints for applause may never be satisfied, for applause fades. The writer who chases fame may collapse under rejection, but the creator who pours themselves into the process finds joy even in solitude, even in obscurity. The art itself becomes the reward. Paradoxically, such work often resonates more deeply with others because it is born from authenticity rather than desperation. This distinction also heals spiritual practice. Many approach meditation or prayer with the goal of enlightenment, peace, or visions. When these outcomes do not arrive quickly, frustration sets in. But true practice is about the process: sitting, breathing, returning to awareness. Enlightenment, if it comes, is a byproduct. The practice itself is the path. When we let go of demanding outcomes, spiritual practice becomes steady and sustainable. Detachment from outcome also cultivates patience. Clinging to results demands speed. I must arrive now. I must achieve soon. This urgency breeds tension, but when anchored in process, time loses its tyranny. Growth may take years, yet every step carries value. Patience blooms because the journey itself is fulfilling. This patience is not passive waiting, it is active presence. One of the deepest lessons here is freedom from fear. Attachment to outcomes creates constant anxiety. What if I fail? What if I never arrive? What if all effort is wasted? These fears haunt every step. But when we release the outcome, fear loosens its grip. You act boldly because failure is no longer a death sentence. The process itself has meaning, regardless of what follows. This freedom empowers risk, courage, and resilience. This principle also shifts how we teach and guide others. Parents who cling to outcomes demand that children become certain kinds of people, carry certain careers, fulfill certain dreams. This creates pressure and distance. But parents who value the process nurture curiosity, kindness, resilience. They guide children not toward fixed outcomes, but toward the capacity to walk their own path. This creates trust and authenticity in relationships. Detachment from outcomes also reveals that much of life is beyond our control. Weather, timing, other people's choices all shape results. To cling to outcomes is to demand control over what was never ours. To detach is to focus on what is ours: intention, effort, presence. This clarity brings peace because we stop fighting battles that cannot be won. And yet, this does not mean abandoning goals. Detachment from outcomes still allows vision, planning, and direction. It means holding them lightly, adjusting when life shifts, and not letting identity collapse when results differ. Goals remain, but they guide without enslaving. The focus returns to walking well, not obsessing over the horizon. Ultimately, the balance is this: surrender the destination, but honor the journey. Detachment from outcome frees us from the tyranny of results. Commitment to process ensures that life is lived with depth, integrity, and presence. Together, they create a life where effort is steady, peace is constant, and freedom is found not in reaching the end, but in walking each step with open eyes and an open heart. And after learning the delicate balance between committing to the journey and releasing the destination, another truth begins to reveal itself, one that shifts the very way we think about detachment. For much of the path, we speak of letting go, of loosening our grip on desires, identities, outcomes, and possessions. But there is a deeper layer where letting go is not the full answer. Sometimes the mind's attempt to let go is still another form of struggle, another hidden grasping in disguise. What if the practice is not about pushing things away, but simply allowing them to be? The power of let be transforms detachment into something softer, more natural, and far more sustainable. When we try too hard to let go, we create resistance. The mind says, I should not feel this anger, I should not want this desire, I must get rid of this thought. But in that very effort, we tighten the knot. Pushing away is still clinging to the idea of how things should be. Letting be breaks this cycle. It allows emotions, desires, and thoughts to exist without judgment, without suppression, without compulsive action. Paradoxically, when we stop trying to force them away, they loosen on their own. This practice teaches us that freedom does not always come from rejection, but from acceptance. Anger, allowed to be without feeding it, eventually fades. Grief, honored without resistance, eventually softens. Desire, acknowledged without shame, eventually reveals its lesson. By letting be, we stop adding fuel to the fire. We discover that many struggles only survive because of our attempts to fight them. The power of letting be also applies to relationships. We often approach others with the subtle demand that they change, that they align with our preferences, that they fulfill the image we hold of them. This creates constant friction. But when we allow people to be who they are, without forcing them into our mold, relationships breathe more freely. This does not mean tolerating harm or abandoning boundaries. It means honoring the reality of another's being instead of clinging to an illusion. Letting be creates space for authentic connection because it removes the constant pressure of control. In daily life, letting be shows up in how we handle discomfort. Modern culture trains us to escape or fix every unpleasant feeling immediately. Loneliness, boredom, restlessness, we rush to fill the gaps with distraction. But what happens when we simply let these states be? Often, they pass like clouds, revealing deeper stillness beneath. By allowing them, we learn they are not threats but passing experiences. This shifts the relationship we have with our inner world, making us less reactive and more at peace. Letting be is also crucial in spiritual practice. Many practitioners, in their eagerness to progress, force themselves to eliminate thoughts or suppress desires. Yet this force only strengthens attachment. Real meditation is not about pushing thoughts away, but observing them as they are. To let the mind be is to see its movements clearly without interference. From this clarity, natural stillness arises. This is why masters often say the mind does not need fixing, it needs space. This approach reshapes how we understand healing. Emotional wounds do not close because we force them shut. They heal when we allow them to breathe, when we stop reopening them with resistance, when we sit with the ache without trying to erase it. Letting be turns the heart into a safe space where pain can transform naturally. It teaches us patience, reminding us that healing is not achieved by control, but by allowing time and tenderness to do their quiet work. There is also a profound humility in letting be. To let go often feels like an achievement, something we do, something we succeed at. But letting be is less about doing and more about surrendering control. It acknowledges that life is larger than our will, that some things cannot be pushed away, only allowed. This humility opens us to grace, to the unfolding of life beyond our demands. The practice also reveals the difference between repression and release. Repression is when we shove something down, pretending it does not exist. Release is when we allow it to exist without binding ourselves to it. Letting be avoids the trap of repression by inviting full awareness. Nothing is denied, nothing is hidden, nothing is forced. In that openness, the grip naturally loosens. Letting be does not mean passivity. It does not mean refusing to act when action is needed. It means acting from clarity rather than compulsion. For example, if anger arises, letting be does not mean lashing out or ignoring it. It means observing the anger, acknowledging its presence, and then choosing a response rather than reacting blindly. This space between impulse and response is where freedom lives. Even in the face of uncertainty, letting be brings peace. Life's unpredictability often drives us into endless planning, worrying, and controlling, yet much of what we fear cannot be managed by effort alone. Letting be does not solve uncertainty, but it transforms our relationship to it. Instead of fighting the unknown, we rest within it. This is not resignation but acceptance, the courage to live fully without needing absolute control. This principle extends to how we relate to the world itself. So much conflict arises because we refuse to let the world be what it is. We demand that politics align with our ideals, that society move at our pace, that nature follow our conveniences. While action is necessary for change, suffering multiplies when we believe the world must conform perfectly to our will. Letting be allows us to act wisely without drowning in frustration. It helps us hold the tension between engagement and acceptance. The beauty of letting be is that it dissolves the constant inner battle. Life does not need to be resisted at every turn. We can allow the flow of joy and sorrow, of gain and loss, of clarity and confusion. This openness does not weaken us, it makes us resilient. Because when we stop resisting what is, we stop being broken by it. We bend, we adapt, we endure, and so letting be becomes a deeper expression of detachment. Letting go loosens the grip on what we hold. Letting be releases the struggle with what already is. Together, they form a complete freedom, freedom from clutching at the future and freedom from fighting the present. This freedom is not abstract. It is lived in every breath, every thought, every relationship. To let be is to walk through life with open hands and an open heart. It is to allow things to arise and pass without chains. It is to recognize that peace does not come from forcing life into shape, but from allowing it to show itself as it is. And in this allowing, we find the quiet strength that no storm can shake. And after seeing the freedom that comes from letting things be, instead of constantly forcing them away, we now arrive at one of the most hidden and uncomfortable truths on the path. Sometimes it is not the joy we cling to, not the possessions, not even the people, but our pain itself. As strange as it sounds, many carry suffering like a badge, holding it close because it gives them identity, meaning, or familiarity. To let it go feels like losing a part of who they are. Emotional attachment to suffering is one of the most powerful chains because, unlike wealth, relationships, or desires, pain disguises itself as truth. Suffering becomes identity when we repeat its story until it defines us. A heartbreak becomes "I am unlovable." A failure becomes "I am worthless." A betrayal becomes "I am always a victim." These stories are not just memories, they become the foundation of self-image. And once the mind accepts them as identity, it clings, even when the clinging hurts. Why? Because identity, no matter how painful, feels safer than emptiness. Better to be someone wounded than to face the unknown of who we are without the wound. This attachment to suffering also arises from familiarity. Pain repeated becomes strangely comfortable. The mind learns its contours, its rhythm, its weight. Joy feels unfamiliar, even threatening, because it does not fit the story we have built. And so, when moments of peace or happiness arise, they are dismissed quickly. This won't last. This isn't me. The suffering, though heavy, feels like home. To detach from it requires stepping into unfamiliar territory which the mind resists. There is also the subtle reward of suffering. It can draw sympathy, attention, or care from others. Without realizing it, people cling to pain because it brings validation. To let go of suffering feels like losing the attention it draws. Yet this is a fragile comfort because it depends on others continuing to feed the wound. Detachment teaches us to seek deeper freedom, peace that does not require being seen as broken. On another level, attachment to suffering comes from fear of responsibility. If we release our pain, we can no longer explain away inaction or avoidance. Clinging to wounds becomes an excuse. I cannot change because I am damaged. I cannot grow because I was hurt. The suffering becomes both prison and shield. Detachment challenges this shield, asking us to face life without excuses, which can feel terrifying but is the only path to freedom. The Buddhist teaching of the second arrow points directly to this dynamic. The first arrow is life's unavoidable pain, loss, illness, disappointment. The second arrow is what we add, the identity, the story, the resistance. We cannot always avoid the first arrow, but the second is self-inflicted, and yet many cling to the second arrow as if it were essential. Detachment from suffering means dropping the second arrow, refusing to define ourselves by the wound. This practice requires courage. To release attachment to suffering means stepping into the unknown of who we are without it. It means risking new joy, new connection, new identity. It means admitting that pain is not the core of who we are, but a passing state. For many, this feels like death, because the ego is deeply invested in being the one who suffers. Yet when we take the leap, we discover that beneath suffering lies a self not broken but whole, not defined by wounds but by awareness itself. In relationships, attachment to suffering often manifests as cycles of conflict. Two people repeat the same arguments, not because they want the pain, but because the pain confirms their story. One may cling to the identity of being ignored, the other to the identity of being attacked. Both are attached to roles born of suffering. Only when they release these roles can the cycle break. This release does not erase history, but frees them from repeating it endlessly. In personal growth, attachment to suffering blocks progress. We may start to meditate or heal, but when peace arises, the mind pulls back. This is too strange. This is not who I am. Growth feels like betrayal of the suffering self. Detachment here means trusting the unfamiliar, allowing peace to stay without sabotaging it. It means daring to become someone beyond the old wounds. Even society reinforces attachment to suffering. Many cultures glorify victimhood or martyrdom, rewarding those who display pain while dismissing those who move beyond it. This creates pressure to cling to suffering as proof of authenticity. But true authenticity does not lie in endlessly displaying wounds. It lies in living fully beyond them. Detachment invites us to honor pain without turning it into identity. Healing becomes possible when we let suffering be what it is, an experience, not a definition. This means sitting with pain without weaving it into the story of me. Grief is grief, anger is anger, fear is fear. They are real, but they are not the whole of existence. By allowing them to flow without attaching identity, they soften naturally. The grip weakens, not through force, but through recognition. This practice also deepens compassion. When we see how much we cling to our own pain, we recognize how others do the same. We stop judging people for being stuck and begin to understand the invisible chains that bind them. Compassion flows, not in pity, but in shared humanity. We know what it means to be attached to suffering, and we know the courage it takes to release it. Detachment from suffering does not mean denial. It does not mean pretending pain never happened. It means refusing to make pain the center of identity. It means honoring the wound without building a home inside it. This distinction is vital. Denial buries pain. Detachment frees it. One hides, the other releases. The deepest freedom comes when we see suffering not as self, but as teacher. Each wound shows us where we cling, where we resist, where we fear. If we meet suffering with awareness instead of identity, it transforms into wisdom. The heartbreak teaches impermanence. The failure teaches humility. The betrayal teaches discernment. Pain loses its grip because it no longer defines, it guides. And so, emotional attachment to suffering is not weakness, but misunderstanding. We cling because we mistake pain for identity, familiarity, or safety. But suffering is none of these. It is a visitor, not a home. To detach from it is to step into life beyond the wound, life defined not by scars but by presence. This freedom does not erase the past, but redeems it, turning pain into strength and wounds into wisdom. When we stop clinging to suffering, we do not lose ourselves, we finally meet ourselves. Not the self built from wounds and stories, but the self that was always here, vast, whole, and free. And after uncovering how people sometimes cling to suffering as if it were their very identity, the next step is to see how the same pattern plays out in one of the most beautiful expressions of human life: creativity. Just as we hold on to pain because it defines us, we often hold on to recognition because it validates us. Artists, writers, musicians, creators of every kind can become prisoners of praise, slaves to approval, or paralyzed by fear of judgment. Yet creativity in its purest form does not bloom from applause, but from freedom. Detachment here is not about rejecting art or abandoning ambition. It is about releasing the need for recognition so that the creative spirit can breathe fully. When creativity is tied to recognition, every brushstroke, every word, every performance carries the weight of expectation. The mind whispers, "Will they like it? Will it be good enough? Will this prove my worth?" In that space, art becomes calculation, not expression. The fear of rejection blocks risk-taking, and the hunger for applause drains joy from the process. Detachment dissolves this pressure. It allows creation to arise for its own sake, not for the reactions it might provoke. The artist is no longer bound by the audience, but liberated by the act itself. This liberation does not mean the artist refuses recognition. Recognition may still come, and when it does, it can be appreciated. But it is no longer the fuel, no longer the measure of value. Detachment means that whether the work is praised, ignored, or criticized, the act of creating remains whole. This steadiness allows the artist to continue, to explore, to evolve, without being trapped by external judgment. The greatest works often emerge when creators detach from outcome. Many masterpieces were dismissed in their time, only to be celebrated generations later. If the artists had tied their worth to immediate recognition, their work might never have survived. Detachment protects creativity from the short-sightedness of society. It reminds the artist that value is not always visible in the present, and that the true purpose of creation is not applause, but authenticity. Creativity flourishes in play, experimentation, and risk. But when recognition dominates, risk feels dangerous. The artist sticks to what is safe, what sells, what pleases. Innovation dies in the grip of attachment. Detachment revives it. When the fear of failure no longer rules, the creator dares to explore new forms, to make mistakes, to wander into the unknown. And in that exploration, true originality is born. This principle applies not only to art, but to every form of creativity, problem-solving, innovation, leadership, even daily living. When we detach from recognition, we stop censoring ourselves to fit expectations. We allow fresh ideas to flow, unfiltered by fear. Detachment does not limit creativity. It expands it by removing the chains of judgment. There is also a deeper spiritual truth here. Creation itself is an act of life flowing through us. When we cling to recognition, we claim ownership of that flow, insisting it proves something about us. But in reality, creativity is less about control and more about openness. The artist does not invent beauty but channels it. The musician does not own the melody but receives it. Detachment honors this flow, allowing it to move freely without being suffocated by ego. This does not mean that skill, discipline, or refinement are unimportant. Detachment is not carelessness. It means practicing and honing craft with devotion, but without enslaving the heart to applause. Discipline and freedom walk together. The detached creator works tirelessly, not to impress, but to bring truth into form. Recognition, if it comes, is secondary. Detachment also protects the creator from despair. Recognition is fickle. Tastes change, trends fade, audiences shift. If value is tied to these unstable measures, the artist's spirit rises and falls with every review. But when value rests in the act of creation itself, the spirit remains steady. Criticism becomes feedback rather than devastation. Success becomes encouragement rather than addiction. This resilience sustains creativity for a lifetime. The power of detachment also transforms collaboration. When ego clings to recognition, collaboration becomes competition. Who gets credit? Whose idea dominates? Detachment dissolves this hunger. The focus shifts from ownership to shared creation, from mine to ours. In this openness, collaboration becomes richer, blending diverse perspectives into something greater than any individual could achieve. For many, the deepest fear in creativity is not failure, but invisibility, that their work will go unnoticed, forgotten, lost. Detachment addresses this fear directly. It says, the act itself was already complete, already meaningful, regardless of who sees it. The flower does not bloom only if someone watches. It blooms because blooming is its nature. The detached artist creates in the same way, offering their work as an expression of life itself, not a plea for attention. This shift also heals perfectionism. Perfectionism is attachment disguised as discipline, the desperate need for the work to be flawless so that recognition is guaranteed. But perfectionism suffocates creativity, leading to endless editing, hesitation, or abandonment. Detachment allows imperfection, not as laziness, but as honesty. Life itself is imperfect, and art that reflects this carries authenticity. By releasing the demand for flawless recognition, the artist allows the work to live. Creativity also teaches detachment in return. Every creation, once released into the world, takes on a life of its own. Readers interpret books differently than writers intended. Listeners hear songs through the filter of their own experiences. Audiences project meanings the creator never imagined. To cling to total control is futile. Detachment honors this truth, allowing the work to belong to the world rather than clinging to how it should be received. In practice, cultivating detachment in creativity means returning to presence. To write, paint, play, build not for tomorrow's applause, but for today's act. To enter the flow where time dissolves and the self disappears. In these moments, recognition does not matter. The process itself is fulfillment. This presence is the heart of creative freedom, and so, detachment in creativity is not the end of ambition but its purification. It refines the motivation behind art, shifting it from ego to expression, from fear to freedom. It protects against the poison of recognition without denying its sweetness. It sustains the creative spirit through failure, success, obscurity, and change. It allows art to be what it was always meant to be, a celebration of being alive, unbound by the chains of applause. To create without fear is to return to the innocence of childhood play, where building, drawing, or singing was done for the joy of it, not for validation. Detachment restores this innocence in adult form. It is the freedom to risk, to explore, to share, without being broken by silence or inflated by praise. This is why artists flourish when they release attachment to recognition, because they finally return to the source of creativity itself, the unfiltered, unstoppable flow of life. And after seeing how creativity expands when freed from the chains of recognition, we begin to notice another form of attachment that is far less visible, but perhaps even more powerful. It does not live in possessions, relationships, or even achievements. It lives in the mind itself. We cling not only to things but to ideas and beliefs. These invisible attachments are some of the hardest to release because they disguise themselves as truth. We do not say, "This is my belief, and I cling to it." We say, "This is how things are." Rigidity of thought closes the door to wisdom because it leaves no space for new understanding. Attachment to ideas offers the illusion of safety. Beliefs give structure, identity, and stability in a world that constantly changes. They tell us who we are, who others are, and how life should unfold. Yet when we grip them tightly, we become blind to perspectives that do not fit. We dismiss anything that threatens our mental structure, not because it is false, but because it is unfamiliar. Detachment from beliefs does not mean abandoning values or drifting in confusion. It means holding our thoughts lightly, with openness to growth, knowing that wisdom requires flexibility. Rigid attachment to ideas creates conflict, both within and without. When the mind insists on being right, every disagreement becomes a threat. Conversations turn into battles, relationships fracture, communities divide. This is not caused by the diversity of beliefs, but by the clinging to them. Detachment allows us to engage in dialogue with humility, to listen without fear, to change when new truth is revealed. Openness does not weaken conviction, it strengthens wisdom, because it roots our understanding in reality rather than ego. On a personal level, attachment to beliefs often blocks transformation. Someone may believe, "I am not creative," or "I will never change," or "people cannot be trusted." These thoughts become invisible chains, shaping behavior and limiting possibility. When life offers evidence to the contrary, the mind rejects it, because clinging to the belief feels safer than questioning it. Detachment invites us to step back and ask, "Is this thought serving me or binding me?" In that space, growth becomes possible. Beliefs also shape identity, and identity resists change. A person may cling to being the rational one, or the victim, or the achiever. These labels offer certainty, but at a cost, they prevent us from seeing the fullness of our being. Life is not static, yet identity chained to belief tries to freeze it. Detachment loosens these labels, allowing us to evolve without betraying ourselves. We discover that we are more than any single story. This attachment is especially powerful in spiritual practice. Many cling to beliefs about enlightenment, morality, or tradition, turning them into dogma. They follow the form but miss the essence. The Buddha himself warned against clinging, even to his own teachings, comparing them to a raft used to cross a river necessary for the crossing, but not to be carried forever. Detachment from beliefs means using them as guides, not prisons. Wisdom arises not from memorizing doctrines but from direct experience. The danger of rigid belief is that it narrows perception. We see only what confirms our view and dismiss what challenges it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but Buddhism recognized it centuries ago as grasping at views. This grasping blinds us to reality. Detachment frees us to see more clearly, because we are no longer filtering life through the demand that it fit our ideas. We meet life as it is, not as we insist it must be. In relationships, attachment to ideas fuels misunderstanding. Partners may cling to beliefs about roles: who should provide, who should nurture, who should lead. These beliefs, when rigid, suffocate connection. But when both allow openness, roles can shift naturally with circumstances. Detachment makes relationships flexible, responsive, alive. Without it, they become rigid performances of outdated ideas. In society, clinging to ideology has caused wars, oppression, and division. When groups cling so tightly to beliefs that they dehumanize others, wisdom disappears. Detachment here does not mean abandoning principles of justice or compassion, but holding even our most cherished views with humility. It means recognizing that no single belief system captures the whole of truth. This humility is the soil in which peace can grow. Detachment from beliefs also nurtures curiosity. When we are not afraid to be wrong, we ask questions more freely. We explore without fear of contradiction. Curiosity is the seed of wisdom, and it withers in the soil of rigid belief. By letting go of the need to defend every thought, we become students of life again, open to wonder, open to surprise. This practice does not leave us adrift. Detachment does not strip us of values or direction, it refines them. Instead of clinging to beliefs as absolute, we test them against experience, adjusting when needed. This flexibility makes our values more resilient, because they are rooted in reality rather than dogma. Detachment does not weaken our foundation, it makes it adaptable. On an inner level, letting go of rigid beliefs brings peace. Defending ideas is exhausting. The constant need to prove, argue, or protect drains the spirit. When we release this compulsion, we find spaciousness. We can still hold views, but we do not carry them like shields. We rest more easily, knowing that truth is vast and we do not need to control it. Even in creativity, detachment from beliefs plays a role. When an artist clings to the belief that art must look a certain way, their work stagnates. When a writer clings to rules too tightly, their voice weakens. Detachment allows new forms, new visions, new truths to emerge. Beliefs may guide technique, but openness allows evolution. And so, invisible attachments to ideas and beliefs may be some of the strongest chains we carry, precisely because they are hidden. They shape how we see, how we act, how we love, and how we suffer. To loosen them is to reclaim freedom, not freedom from thought, but freedom from rigidity. It is to live with beliefs as companions rather than masters, guides rather than prisons. In this freedom, wisdom emerges. Because wisdom does not arise from defending what we already know. It arises from openness, from humility, from the courage to say, perhaps there is more. Detachment from beliefs does not empty the mind, it clears space for truth to enter. And in that space, wisdom unfolds naturally, like light entering a room once clutter has been cleared away. And after uncovering how invisible attachments to beliefs quietly shape and limit our freedom, the path invites us to look outward, to a teacher that has been beside us all along, yet often goes unnoticed. Where the human mind clings, nature releases. Where we fight against change, nature moves in rhythm with it. Among the most powerful teachers in this silent school are the trees. They live without rush, without resistance, and without clinging. Through their seasonal cycles, they show us what it means to embrace impermanence, to let go not as a loss, but as a natural part of life. When autumn arrives, the tree does not resist. It does not fight to keep its leaves, even though they have defined its beauty all summer long. It releases them, one by one, with no complaint, no bargaining, no fear. And in that release, the tree does not become empty. It prepares itself for rest, for renewal, for another spring. This rhythm reveals what detachment truly looks like. To let go is not to die inside, but to honor the cycle of change. Humans, unlike trees, cling desperately to seasons of life. We hold on to youth, to relationships, to roles, to successes long past their time. When life asks us to release, we resist, and the resistance multiplies suffering. The tree shows another way. It teaches that every season has its gift: growth, flowering, harvest, shedding, and rest. None is superior, all are necessary. When we align with this truth, impermanence no longer terrifies us. It becomes the pulse of life itself. The lesson of the tree extends beyond seasons into every part of existence. The way branches bend in storms shows resilience born of surrender. Trees do not break by resisting every gust. They sway, they yield, they move with the wind. This is the essence of detachment. To cling rigidly is to snap. To bend is to survive. Human life, filled with unexpected storms, asks the same wisdom. Release the illusion of control, flow with change, and strength will reveal itself. Even the roots of a tree carry wisdom. They sink deep into the earth, unseen, supporting growth above. In the same way, when we detach from surface illusions, wealth, status, appearance, we discover deeper roots of being, values, presence, awareness. Detachment is not emptiness, but depth. Just as the tree draws nourishment from below while shedding what is no longer needed above, we too can let go of outer clinging while grounding ourselves in what sustains. Trees also embody patience. They do not rush spring, nor resist winter. They trust the timing of nature, knowing that fruit ripens only when conditions align. Humans often struggle here, demanding results on our schedule, refusing to wait. The tree teaches surrender to timing, a form of detachment that brings peace. By trusting the rhythm of life, we waste less energy in resistance and discover calm even in waiting. The cycle of shedding also teaches that loss is not the end, but the beginning of renewal. The leaves that fall enrich the soil, feeding new life. Nothing is wasted. In the same way, when we let go of attachments, the very act of release nourishes growth. A failed relationship, a lost opportunity, an old identity, each, when released, fertilizes the ground for new possibilities. Detachment is not sterile, it is fertile. Observing nature also dissolves the illusion of permanence. Mountains crumble, rivers shift, skies change, forests rise and fall. The tree is never the same from one season to the next, nor are we. Yet, in our clinging, we demand constancy. Detachment is the practice of aligning ourselves with what nature already lives. Change is not a threat, but the essence of existence. The tree also shows us humility. It does not cling to recognition when in full bloom, nor collapse in despair when bare. Its worth is not tied to appearance. Each phase is lived fully, without shame. This humility is a form of detachment from image, a reminder that our value does not depend on constant flowering. To be bare in winter is as sacred as to be lush in summer. In our modern lives, where speed and accumulation dominate, the wisdom of the tree feels radical. We chase growth without pause, success without rest, youth without aging. But the tree thrives because it honors rest as much as action. It knows that winter's stillness is as vital as summer's abundance. Detachment from constant productivity allows us to rest without guilt, to see pauses not as failures, but as preparation for renewal. The metaphor extends to relationships. Leaves fall not because the tree hates them, but because their time is complete. In the same way, people and roles leave our lives. To cling to them is to resist the natural flow. Detachment does not mean coldness, it means honoring what was while allowing its departure. In this release, space is made for new connections, just as bare branches prepare for new leaves. The wisdom of nature also challenges our obsession with control. We prune, manage, and manipulate, yet nature thrives most when allowed to flow. The tree does not command the sun, demand the rain, or order the seasons. It receives, adapts, and continues. Detachment invites us to live the same way, to stop commanding life to obey us and instead align with its currents. In this surrender lies strength. Even decay is a lesson. The fallen tree nourishes the forest, becoming soil for new growth. Death itself is part of the cycle. We resist this truth fiercely, clinging to permanence, fearing endings. But nature shows that endings feed beginnings, that loss is never final but part of transformation. Detachment from the illusion of eternal possession allows us to meet death in small and large forms with grace rather than terror. To live like the tree is to embody impermanence with dignity, to grow when it is time, to release when it is time, to rest when it is time, to let each season unfold without demanding it stay forever. This is not weakness but wisdom. It is the natural rhythm of detachment, lived not as theory but as being. And so, the tree's way of letting go is not about abandonment but about flow. It is not about indifference but about harmony. It is not about losing but about transforming. In learning from nature, we remember what the mind forgets, that life is not a straight line but a cycle, and that freedom comes not from fighting the cycle, but from moving with it. In this way, every leaf that falls, every storm that passes, every winter that deepens, becomes not a threat, but a teacher, reminding us that impermanence is not the enemy, it is the path to peace. And after learning from the trees how to honor cycles of growth and release, another form of letting go calls us deeper inward, one that hides not in possessions, not in relationships, not even in beliefs, but in the very heart of our spiritual journey. For many seekers, the path brings moments of light, visions, bliss, flashes of clarity, and mystical states that feel like touching eternity itself. These moments can be beautiful, but they are also dangerous when clung to. The mind, hungry for permanence, tries to trap them, to repeat them, to build identity around them. Yet the very grasping that holds on to spiritual highs is the same grasping that blocks awakening. True freedom asks us to be detached even from the most sacred experiences. Visions and mystical states often feel like proof, evidence that we are progressing, that we are special, that enlightenment is near. But clinging to these states is like stopping halfway up a mountain to admire the view, believing you have reached the summit. The beauty is real, but it is not the end. Detachment teaches us to honor these experiences without being enslaved by them. They are signposts, not destinations. Bliss in meditation is a common trap. When the mind enters stillness, waves of peace and joy can arise, so profound they feel like arrival. But attachment to bliss creates suffering the moment it fades. The seeker begins to chase the state, to force it, to compare every session to the one where bliss appeared. This craving pulls the mind out of presence, away from awakening, into obsession. Detachment allows us to receive bliss with gratitude and let it pass without grief. The experience becomes nourishment rather than chain. Visions, too, can mislead. Mystical imagery, lights, voices, or powerful sensations may arise in practice. They can inspire, but they can also inflate the ego. I have seen what others have not. I am chosen. I am advanced. This identity clinging is subtle but potent, turning spiritual practice into another form of possession. Detachment reminds us that visions are not the goal. They are like dreams, sometimes meaningful, sometimes random, always passing. The awakened heart rests not in what is seen, but in the clarity that sees. Even profound awakenings can become prisons if grasped. A single moment of insight, when clung to, turns into nostalgia or dogma. That was it. I must get it back. But awakening is not about returning to a moment. It is about living in the truth that every moment is impermanent. To cling to a past awakening is to miss the living presence of now. Detachment frees us from chasing ghosts of enlightenment, allowing continuous unfolding rather than fixation. The Buddha himself warned against attachment to jhana states, deep absorptions of meditation filled with bliss, clarity, or spaciousness. He recognized their beauty but taught that they are not the final liberation. To cling to them is to remain bound, intoxicated by temporary pleasure. Detachment invites us to use these states as supports, but not as ends. They strengthen the mind, but they must also be released. This principle teaches humility. The ego can hijack spiritual experiences, claiming them as proof of superiority. But detachment strips away this pride. It reminds us that mystical states are gifts, not achievements. They are conditions that arise and pass like everything else. To hold them lightly is to remain grounded, humble, and open. Detachment from spiritual highs also protects us from despair. When seekers cling to past experiences, their absence creates doubt. Why can't I get back to that state? Have I lost my path? This doubt corrodes practice. Detachment removes the comparison. Each session, each prayer, each moment stands on its own, valuable not because it recreates the past, but because it is lived fully now. It also prevents dependency. Some chase altered states through techniques, rituals, or substances, believing these are the essence of spirituality. But dependency enslaves rather than frees. Detachment teaches that true awakening is not bound to any condition. It is the awareness present before, during, and after every state. Mystical experiences may come and go, but awareness remains. To rest in that awareness is the heart of freedom. Detachment does not mean dismissing these experiences. It means receiving them with gratitude and letting them go without clutching. It is the balance between honoring and releasing. In this way, every vision, every blissful state, every insight becomes a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. They enrich the path without defining it. This practice deepens wisdom. When we are not blinded by the glow of mystical states, we begin to see the ordinary as sacred. The sound of the wind, the rhythm of breath, the kindness of a smile, these simple realities reveal, awakening more steadily than fleeting ecstasies. Detachment frees us from chasing fireworks so that we can rest in the quiet light of daily life. In relationships, this wisdom prevents spiritual arrogance. Those who cling to mystical experiences often create distance, seeing themselves as above others. But detachment brings equality. It reminds us that every person walks their own path, that spiritual worth is not measured by visions, but by compassion lived daily. This humility nurtures connection rather than separation. Detachment from spiritual experiences also sustains practice over the long term. Without detachment, the ups and downs of mystical states create instability. With detachment, practice becomes steady, like a river flowing regardless of weather. The seeker remains present, committed, and free from the roller coaster of craving and disappointment. And so, non-attachment to spiritual experiences is one of the most profound forms of freedom. It asks us to release even the most beautiful states, to see them as passing, to refuse to build identity around them. In this release, the path becomes clear. Awakening is not found in clinging to light, bliss, or visions, but in the awareness that holds all states without attachment. This awareness cannot be lost, because it was never dependent on experience. It is the very ground of being itself. And after seeing how even the most luminous spiritual experiences must be held lightly, the question deepens: what kind of strength does it take to release something we once thought defined our awakening? For many, detachment is misunderstood as weakness, as if letting go were an act of avoidance, a turning away from life, a refusal to engage. But the truth is the opposite. Detachment is not escape, it is courage. It takes immense strength to face reality as it is, to unclench the fists of attachment, to release what the heart desperately wants to keep. Letting go is not for the faint of heart. It is an act of bravery that opens the way to true freedom. The courage of detachment begins with honesty. It takes strength to admit when something has ended, when a relationship has run its course, when a chapter of life is closing. The mind prefers denial, spinning stories of maybe it will last or maybe it will return. Clinging feels easier because it delays grief. But to let go is to confront the truth head-on, to allow ourselves to feel the ache of impermanence without numbing or pretending. This is not escape. It is the raw courage of presence. It also requires strength to release identities we have outgrown. To detach from an old version of ourselves means stepping into the unknown. We often cling to labels successful, needed, spiritual, strong, because they shield us from uncertainty. But life keeps asking us to evolve. The courage of detachment is the willingness to shed these skins and trust that who we are becoming is not a loss, but a continuation. Escape avoids growth. Courage embraces it. Letting go of resentment is another form of bravery. Anger can feel powerful, bitterness can feel protective, and holding a grudge can seem safer than opening to forgiveness. To detach from these emotions feels vulnerable, almost like surrendering a weapon. But courage is not in holding the blade, it is in laying it down. It is the strength to choose peace over the illusion of power. This choice requires more fortitude than clinging ever could. Detachment also demands courage in love. To love deeply without grasping, to cherish someone while honoring their freedom, to let them walk their path, even when it diverges from ours. This is not avoidance. It is the strength to love without possession. Many think courage is holding on tightly, but the greater courage is to open your hand and still love fully, knowing that nothing is guaranteed. In work and ambition, detachment asks us to pour effort into the process without chaining our worth to the result. It is easy to avoid risk, to escape failure by never trying. But it takes courage to act wholeheartedly, knowing that outcomes may not align with desire. Courage is not in guaranteeing success, but in remaining free, whether success arrives or not. To detach from results is to embrace uncertainty with strength rather than hide from it. Even in grief, detachment reveals itself as courage. To lose someone or something precious and still choose to keep living, still choose to keep loving, is perhaps the bravest act of all. Escape numbs, courage feels. Escape hides, courage faces. Detachment in grief does not mean coldness, but the strength to walk with sorrow without being consumed. It is the heart's way of saying, "This hurts, and yet I will not close myself to life." Detachment also takes courage because it challenges society's expectations. The world often equates clinging with loyalty, possession with love, accumulation with success. To detach is to move against these currents, to live with open hands in a world of clenched fists. This requires not only inner strength, but resilience against judgment and misunderstanding. Detachment is not passive resignation, it is active resistance to illusions that enslave. The courage of detachment is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, often invisible. It shows itself in the person who chooses peace instead of revenge, who releases a dream that no longer serves, who forgives without apology, who accepts endings without bitterness. These acts do not look grand on the surface, but they are profound expressions of strength. This courage is rooted in trust. To let go requires faith that life will continue to unfold, that something new will arise, that emptiness will not destroy us but make space for growth. Fear says, "If I release, I will be left with nothing." Courage says, "If I release, I will be free to receive." This trust is not naive, it is born from experience, from seeing again and again that life does not end at loss but transforms. On the spiritual path, detachment as courage is essential. Awakening is not about escaping the world, but seeing it clearly. It takes strength to let go of cherished illusions, to face impermanence without flinching, to stand in the vastness of uncertainty without clinging to fixed ground. This is why detachment is not cowardice but bravery, the willingness to live without guarantees, without anchors, without illusions. And so, detachment is courage precisely because it demands engagement, not avoidance. It asks us to feel more deeply, not less. It asks us to release control, not to escape responsibility. It asks us to face impermanence without denial, to walk into the unknown without fear, to love without chains. This is the quiet heroism of the detached heart. It does not run from life. It meets life fully, freely, and without fear of loss. And after recognizing that detachment is not escape but courage, another layer of truth unfolds, one that many of us try to overlook. For even if we loosen our grip on wealth, success, or identity, there is still a place where attachment hides with remarkable skill in the way we relate to others. Relationships are powerful mirrors. They reflect back the parts of ourselves we would rather not see, exposing attachments we believed we had already released. The conflicts we face, the longing we feel, the pain of distance or the fear of loss, all of these are not just about the other person, they are about us. They show us where we are still bound. Every argument with a partner, friend, or family member is more than words exchanged. It is a flashlight shining into hidden corners of attachment. When someone criticizes us and anger flares, what is really being threatened is not truth but identity, our attachment to being seen a certain way. When jealousy rises, it is not only about the other person's actions, but our own clinging to possession and fear of loss. These emotional responses reveal the places where freedom has not yet been realized. Longing works the same way. When we feel desperate for someone's attention, approval, or love, the intensity often masks a deeper attachment, perhaps the belief that our worth depends on being wanted, or that security only exists when others stay close. The other person becomes a mirror for our own insecurity, reflecting back the chain we have placed on ourselves. Without relationships, these attachments might remain invisible, but with them, the truth is revealed with clarity that cannot be ignored. The Buddha often emphasized that relationships are fertile ground for awakening because they constantly test our illusions. Alone, it is easy to believe we are detached, but in the presence of others, our hidden grasping emerges. This is why conflict, far from being a sign of failure, can be a profound teacher. Each clash of ego against ego gives us a chance to ask, what am I clinging to right now? What story about myself or the other am I refusing to release? Relationships also reveal attachment through expectations. We build silent contracts. If I give you love, you must give it back. If I support you, you must appreciate me. If I stay loyal, you must never change. These unspoken bargains create suffering because others are not bound to fulfill the scripts we have written in our minds. When they do not play their role, we feel betrayed, not by them, but by our own attachment to expectation. Detachment here means loving without demanding, supporting without bargaining, caring without turning the relationship into a transaction. Even positive emotions can hide attachment. The joy of being loved can turn into grasping when we cling to it, fearing its loss. The pride of being admired can trap us when we become dependent on it. Detachment does not mean refusing these joys. It means savoring them without making them conditions for our peace. To love fully, while knowing the other is free to change or leave, is perhaps the most courageous form of detachment in relationships. The mirror of relationships also shows us where we project. Often, what we dislike in others is something we have not yet accepted in ourselves. A partner's stubbornness irritates us because it reflects our own. A friend's neediness frustrates us because it mirrors the parts of us that crave reassurance. These projections are clues. They reveal attachments to self-image, the refusal to accept certain qualities as part of our own humanity. Detachment allows us to see these mirrors clearly, not with shame but with understanding, using them as opportunities for growth. In families, attachments often run deep. Parents may cling to the belief that children must follow a certain path, mistaking control for love. Children may cling to the need for constant approval, tying their self-worth to parental validation. These patterns create cycles of suffering passed through generations. Detachment does not mean indifference to family bonds. It means loosening these chains of expectation so that love can flow freely. In doing so, relationships shift from control to respect, from fear to trust. Romantic love is perhaps the strongest mirror of all. It awakens longing, vulnerability, and fear in ways few other relationships can. It is here that attachment to possession often disguises itself as passion. Detachment in romance does not mean withholding love. It means offering it without chains. It means allowing intimacy while respecting freedom, cherishing presence without demanding permanence. This is not a lesser love but a deeper one, because it is rooted in choice rather than control. Friendships, too, reveal hidden attachments. When we feel abandoned because a friend grows distant, it often reflects our clinging to the belief that closeness must remain unchanged. Detachment invites us to honor the natural ebb and flow of connection, to value what is present without resenting what has passed. This openness prevents bitterness and allows friendships to evolve naturally, sometimes closer, sometimes apart, always authentic. Work relationships also serve as mirrors. Conflicts with colleagues often highlight attachments to status, recognition, or control. When we feel threatened by another's success, it reflects our own attachment to comparison. Detachment here means engaging in work fully, but releasing the ego's hunger to always come out ahead. In this way, even professional settings become opportunities for spiritual growth. The mirror is also clear in longing for love we do not have. When we ache for someone to complete us, it reveals our attachment to the belief that we are incomplete on our own. This longing is not wrong, it is human, but it is also a teacher. It asks us to look inward, to find the places where we cling to external validation instead of cultivating inner wholeness. Detachment allows us to love when it comes, but also to remain free when it does not. Even silence in relationships can be revealing. When someone withdraws and we feel anxious or desperate, it is not only about their absence, but about our attachment to control, our fear of abandonment. Detachment here means learning to sit with the discomfort of uncertainty, trusting that we can remain whole even when connection falters. Ultimately, relationships are not obstacles to detachment, but catalysts. They push us to see what solitude often hides. Conflict reveals where ego clings. Longing reveals where insecurity binds. Expectations reveal where we demand permanence. Projection reveals where we deny parts of ourselves. To approach relationships as mirrors is to transform them into teachers, to use every interaction as a chance to release another chain. This does not mean relationships become cold or distant. On the contrary, detachment makes them more alive. When we stop clinging, we stop suffocating others with demands. Love becomes freer, respect becomes deeper, presence becomes more genuine. Relationships rooted in detachment are not weaker, they are stronger, because they are built not on chains, but on freedom. So, the mirror of relationships shows us that every conflict, every longing, every ache is not just about the other person, but about us. To meet these reflections with detachment is to grow, to free ourselves from hidden chains, to discover love without possession and connection without fear. In this way, relationships stop being battlegrounds of attachment and become sacred spaces of awakening. Detachment is not about giving up on life. It is about stepping into it with open eyes and open hands. Through each lesson we've explored whether it was learning the difference between detachment and indifference, releasing timelines, loosening identity, accepting impermanence, loving without possession, or even letting go of spiritual highs, we've seen the same truth echo again and again. Freedom does not come from clinging, it comes from allowing. Pain teaches us where we hold too tightly. Nature shows us how to let go with grace, and wisdom reminds us that what is meant for you will never need to be forced. Detachment is not weakness, it is courage. It is not escape, it is engagement without chains. To live this way is to discover joy in the process, peace in the present, and strength in every change. This is the essence of the Buddhist path, not to deny life, but to embrace it fully, without fear of loss, without desperation for control. Now I'd love to hear from you. What part of detachment speaks to you most deeply? Was it the courage of letting go, the freedom in forgiveness, or the reminder from nature that everything has its season? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them, and your reflections add even more wisdom to this journey. And if this message has touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss another lesson on living with clarity, freedom, and peace. Your next step on the path might just be waiting in the next video.